In this world, 9 races coexist: dragon newts, elves, ghouls, dwarves, demons, centaurs, dark elves, beastmen, and finally humans. Of all of them, humans are considered the weakest and the most looked down upon. But amidst this stigma, there was a human boy named Light who was fighting a life and death battle against a giant centipede in the brutal dungeon known as the Abyss. Light was already battered and on the verge of total defeat when, one by one, his companions arrived to save him. Incredibly, his friends represented all the existing races, and their levels were hundreds above Light's. They all told Light to step back and let them deal with the centipede. After the enemy was thoroughly beaten, they all left the dungeon together. Once outside, a blonde elf named Sasha immediately started scolding Light for daring to enter such a brutal dungeon alone. But she was instantly roasted back by Garu, who mocked Sasha, and then everyone else joined in laughing at her. That hilarious moment was cut short when Light apologized, feeling useless to the team. But Drago, one of their leaders, told him he had contributed enough by making them delicious tea. Everyone in this party was indeed different from most. Despite Light being a human, they never looked down on him. Light was incredibly grateful to be a part of this group. As they walked again, they eventually found a bright, empty room at the end of a cave. Light thought it was a resting spot and began preparing tea for everyone. But it turned out they were not there to relax. Drago suddenly walked up to Light and told him they had decided to kick him out of the party. Light was shocked, immediately apologizing and promising not to make any mistakes again. But Garu quickly explained that they never needed Light in the first place. Light was confused, as everyone suddenly seemed so changed. Garu even called Light an idiot for not realizing it was all an act. Drago then revealed all the facts. When Light was 10, everyone had a small chance to get a gift. Light received a gift called Unlimited Gacha, which, when pressed, would dispense a card containing a random object. However, at the time, all the cards that came out were useless items. That's why Light was declared a failure and considered to have no potential. Drago also said they were only pretending to be friends because they were ordered by a higher authority to monitor Light's ability. Sasha admitted she acted friendly only for the sake of her country's interests. Garu immediately jumped in to mock Sasha again. Light grew more confused, asking what they all meant, but they just said they had talked too much. Drago then ordered Garu to finish things up. Garu immediately attacked Light, but Light managed to dodge, albeit barely. Light still thought it was all a joke, until he saw the truly cruel looks in all their eyes. Light tried to escape deeper into the cave, but suddenly, an arrow pierced his leg, causing him to fall. Garu approached with a cruel smile and kicked Light in the stomach, making him scream in pain. A dark elf named Sionne said she wanted to try a torture spell on Light. Sasha shouted, reminding them all that they had agreed to report Light died from a monster to avoid suspicion. Garu stood over the crying and trembling Light, ready to deliver the final blow. But before the attack could land, Light managed to activate a teleportation trap and instantly vanished from the spot. Upon arriving somewhere else, Light could only stare blankly, lie down, and cry. He desperately wanted to see his family again. All the memories and friendship he had built turned out to be nothing but lies. Light held back his tears while swearing due to the intense pain of his betrayal, then vowed to get revenge. But to get revenge, Light first had to survive the dungeon he was now in. The problem was that level 15 monsters started surrounding Light, led by a seemingly impossible to defeat level 1000 Hellhound. Light had nowhere to run, yet he still refused to die. He desperately pressed the Unlimited Gacha, hoping for anything to distract the monsters so he could escape and see his family again. Suddenly, a bright light appeared. The monsters were confused, and so was Light. One of the monsters still attacked, and Light briefly thought this was the end of everything. But a loud voice emerged, commanding the monster to stop. A woman appeared from the light and instantly sliced all the monsters into pieces. Light was stunned, unable to believe someone so powerful could emerge from his gift. The mysterious woman landed gracefully, then looked at Light, who was still sitting in shock, covering his face. She looked at Light with a worried expression and immediately knelt before him. Light was still confused and nervous, but the woman called Light her master. She said she had healed all of Light's wounds and apologized for selfishly acting without permission. Light realized his body was completely healed. The pain vanished as if it had never existed. The woman asked Light for his name, and after Light told her, she repeated the name over and over with a smile, saying it was a noble name. She then introduced herself as Maid Mei, a super ultra rare level 9,999 card that came out of the gacha. Light was completely astonished. Mei immediately swore to be a loyal servant and to protect Light for life. Light was still skeptical if this was all real, but Mei reassured him and asked permission to check if Light's gift was damaged. After getting permission, Mei explained that the unlimited gacha worked depending on the density of magic around it. The stronger the magic in the place, the stronger the card that could be produced. So it was natural that the cards that came out before were just junk, but because they were now on the deepest floor of the abyss, Mei could appear. Mei was impressed that Light could reach that floor alone. But Light immediately burst into tears and confessed that he was actually abandoned by his friends. Mei immediately hugged and comforted Light. She asked Light to order her to kill the people who had hurt him. But Light said he had to do it himself. He wanted to become strong and take revenge with his own hands. Light asked Mei if a human like him could do all that. But Mei immediately knelt and said she would help Light achieve everything. Light then thanked her and activated the gacha again. And in the darkest and most savage dungeon called the Abyss, Light's story of revenge began. 3 years later, on the deepest floor of the Abyss, Light walked casually inside a castle filled with female servants. He greeted everyone and complimented their work. The maids immediately went into a frenzy after Light left, ecstatic to receive attention from their master. Outside the castle, angry voices were heard from the training area. Light approached and saw 3 women: Nazuna, the vampire knight, Ellie, the forbidden mage, and Aoyuki, the monster tamer, arguing. But as soon as Light arrived, they brightened up. Light said he had something important to convey, but a hellhound suddenly appeared, making Light freeze due to past trauma. The 3 women immediately stood in front of Light, ready to slaughter the hellhound, making the monster terrified instead. Light said it was all right, then proceeded to pet the hellhound's head. Not long after, an announcement was heard that the final target had been captured. Everyone there immediately smiled evilly. The time for the revenge that had been postponed for 3 years had begun. Next, in the great city of the wolf, race called Akura, Garu walked casually through the crowd. People greeted him enthusiastically and with praise. And of course, Garu enjoyed every second of the flattery, unaware of what was about to collide with his life. Garu sat casually in a bar, thoroughly enjoying his sake while smiling as the bartender kept praising him. Raising his glass, Garu began bragging about his extraordinary abilities, talking about the importance of doing something until the best results were achieved. That conversation piqued the interest of a beastman sitting next to him, who asked about the secret mission they had previously carried out with the joint party of all races, known as the Gathering of the Races. But Garu only gave a brief answer because the mission was ordered by the state, although internally he felt satisfied that he had become so wealthy just by killing Light. Just as he was thinking he would soon be in the highest position, his instinct suddenly jolted the smell of death, wafted into his nostrils. The beastman immediately became alert, but still tried to focus on the ambition that was right in front of him. Suddenly, the door opened. A beautiful woman entered the bar, immediately catching Garu's attention. It turned out to be Mei, who politely asked for Garu's help in taking her to the last place Light was seen. Mei even offered substantial compensation, immediately surprising Garu as he hadn't expected Light to have noble blood. But a wicked intention immediately formed in Garu's head. Instead of refusing, Garu thought about how he could have some fun with Mei first before finally selling the woman. Garu pretended to be kind, claiming to be Light's friend and saying he would safely escort Mei to the dungeon. But his true intention was clearly different. Accompanied by 10 other beastmen, they entered the cave that was said to be the location of Light's death. Garou started spinning a lie, saying they were ambushed at the time, and Light stepped on a teleportation trap before they could save him. Mei immediately knelt, her eyes welling up, and began to pray. But that was only the beginning. Garou signaled the other beastmen to block the only exit. Everyone began to look at Mei with cunning eyes, but before they could do anything, Mei spoke, revealing her angry heart at not being there when Light was betrayed. Garou was immediately shocked. He asked Mei who she really was. But Mei's answer made everyone tense. Mei reminded them that she had once sworn loyalty to Light, and instantly, a strong apple-like aura burst from her body. It was so powerful that everyone in the room immediately froze, including Garou. A voice emerged, telling Mei to stop. Garou instinctively turned and felt he recognized the voice. As Light lowered the hood of his cloak, Garou's eyes widened in astonishment. The boy they thought was dead was now standing in front of him, waving and giving a bright smile, saying he had waited 3 years for his revenge. Garou was initially shocked, but quickly adopted a smug attitude. He still believed Light was just a weak, level 15 human. In his mind, if he could bring back Light's corpse, the Dragonutes would surely be indebted to him. But Light just glanced at him contemptuously, laughing at how arrogant and stupid Garou was. Even so, Garou and his henchmen still thought the two of them, Light and Mei, were nothing. Garou laughed maniacally, completely certain that they could defeat Light. He ordered his men to block the exit and kill the boy. 2 beastmen immediately lunged, their eyes filled with killing intent. But before they could even touch Light, their heads were instantly severed from their bodies, and yups, cut cleanly by Mei. The room became instantly tense. Everyone started to panic, but Garou still tried to regain control, confident their strength was sufficient. Light just sighed, annoyed that Garou was still underestimating a human after 3 years. Garou became even more emotional, ranting about how creatures like them could level up so quickly, unlike humans. Garou felt superior because he was level 158. But Light didn't back down. The boy instead asked Garou why there were heads rolling on the ground if they thought they were winning. Garou still dismissed it as a mere trick, then yelled, ordering all his men to attack together. In an instant, Light used a magic staff and struck down the beastmen one by one, including Garou. They were all thrown back, falling and groaning in pain. Mei merely stood at the edge of the room, her eyes sparkling as she watched her master's actions. All the beastmen were nervous, trying to get up, but Light stood calmly, gazing at Garou with a cold stare. Garou lifted his head in anger, but suddenly vomited from the hit to his stomach. He started muttering about his hatred for humans, unable to believe he was losing to the race he deemed the lowest. Garou shouted for Light to stop underestimating him. He then pulled something out of his pouch, which made Light a little curious. Garou jumped back and threw a pearl onto the ground. He uttered the name Fenrir, and a bright light immediately exploded, blinding everyone. Garou smirked wickedly, explaining that it was a monster ball, an expensive item that could store high-level monsters. From within the light, a massive canine monster with a wolf-like body emerged, its body circling Garou. Its roar was deafening, revitalizing the remaining beastmen. The monster was level 500, and Garou thought it was time for Light to feel the regret of not killing him immediately. Light remained relaxed, instead asking if that was truly Garou's trump card. Garou laughed mockingly, thinking Light was crazy. He was certain Light only used magic items, then said Light had to beg for mercy if he wanted to live. Garou continued to babble, even saying he would forgive Light if he could make him laugh. The other beastmen started laughing, but Light only offered a small smile and said, "Okay, I'll stand right here. Let's see how great your supposedly terrifying trump card is." Garou grew even angrier and commanded his Fenrir to burn Light to ashes. Fenrir's breath attack was immediately launched, a deadly monster breath cannon attack that usually guarantees a one-hit kill. But when the dust settled, Light was still standing there, completely unharmed. He merely dusted off his clothes. Garu was instantly shocked, unable to accept reality. The only explanation was an immense difference in level. Light opened his gacha card and summoned his own version of Fenrir. But this Fenrir was different. It was shaped from pure light, majestic, and its level, 9,000. Light ordered his Fenrir to defeat Garu's Fenrir. With a single breath, Garu's monster instantly froze and shattered into pieces. Light greeted his Fenrir while stroking its fur. Garu fell to the ground, terrified. He asked, "How can a human have such a powerful monster?" Light answered with a smile. "I didn't even need to use Fenrir, because my own level is now 9,999. All the beastmen fell silent. One of them murmured that normal humans only reach about level 100. Mei was also level 9,999. Garu began to realize that Light was truly no ordinary human. But Light's face and body were still the same as before. It turned out Light was using a ring of immortality from his gacha to suppress his physical growth, to always remember the pain, betrayal, and anger from 3 years ago. Garu finally gave up. He prostrated himself and apologized, saying everything was just a national order. He was willing for Light to do anything to the other beastmen as long as his life was spared. But everyone in the room immediately grew angry because Garu was clearly only thinking of himself. Light finally asked one last thing. Which country ordered them? But Garu didn't know. He said the beastmen weren't as capable as the other races, so they weren't given the information. Light asked the other beastmen, and they all scrambled to talk, hoping to be saved. But Mei immediately sliced them all down, blood splattering everywhere. She didn't believe a word they said. Their remaining blood splattered around Garu, whose body was trembling violently. Light asked one final question. Did Garu believe he could fight all the nations on the surface world? Garu answered honestly. Light was indeed strong, but to fight the entire world, it seemed impossible. After all the arguments and Garu's utterly failed resistance, Light only smiled faintly and nodded. What Garu said about the limits of power due to the legendary weapons and long history of those nations was indeed true. But even so, Light remained convinced that everything had its limits. Suddenly, Light pulled out a teleportation card. A bright light instantly enveloped the entire room, causing Garu to panic and become confused before everyone there vanished in an instant. When he came to, Garu held his head, breathing heavily, his eyes still closed in fear. But upon opening his eyes, he was shocked to see they had all moved to an incredibly vast room, like a magnificent hall, filled with hundreds, even thousands of people from all races. They all stood neatly, making a path for Light, who was slowly walking towards a majestic throne at the end of the room. As he sat on the throne, everyone immediately bowed deeply, showing profound respect. Light told everyone to raise their heads and display their status boards. Within seconds, status boxes appeared all around the room. Their levels were all far above what Garu's mind could comprehend. The gazes of all those beings turned dark and sharp, all immediately locked onto Garu. Light began to explain that for the past 3 years in the Abyss, everyone in this room had been trained directly by him. All their power was not the result of inheritance or destiny, but the result of the hard work and strength of a human who was once called the weakest race. Light repeated the question he had asked Garu earlier about whether a human like him could fight all the nations on the surface. But this time, Garu couldn't answer. His breathing was heavy, his body weak, and it felt like half his soul had left him. Light saw all of it and became even more convinced that he was truly different from before. Garu finally spoke, asking if Light was some kind of god. Light was silent for a moment, then felt strange but also comfortable hearing that label. In his heart, Light began to wonder, with this much power, what could he truly give to the world? Would he become a bringer of hope and happiness? Or instead, an agent of destruction and despair? Light stood from his throne. His voice was firm and full of fervor. Light announced to all his forces that it was now time to rise from the abyss, seek the truth, and take revenge on all the traitors on the surface. Preparation. A few days after that incident, before they proceeded to the next mission, Light made a stop at his old village. The village that was once full of memories was now just ruins. In front of him were 2 mounds of earth, where Light placed flowers for his parents. His gaze was empty, but his heart was full of wounds. The most painful part was that this wasn't the first time he had been to the surface. About half a year ago, Light had reached the surface after a long struggle, as teleporting from within the abyss wasn't easy to do. At that time, as soon as he arrived at his village, Light immediately fell to his knees. All the buildings were destroyed, there were no signs of life, and corpses were scattered. Light felt like the world was dragging him to the bottom again. But there was one thing that kept his hope alive. There were no signs of his younger siblings' bodies. That meant there was a possibility they were still alive. After that, Light immediately deployed his forces to find out who the perpetrators were. But the results were nil. The only thing he was sure of was that all of this must be connected to the figure of the master hidden by the great nations. A knight in golden armor walked toward Light and asked if he was finished because they had to leave soon. But a girl named Nemumu immediately scolded the knight, called Gold, for speaking to Light like a casual friend. Nemumu was angry, telling Gold to speak politely because Light was their master. Gold just felt that formality was troublesome and instead mocked back, asking if Nemumu wanted to sleep outside alone. Nemumu was still stubborn, saying she didn't mind sleeping anywhere as long as it was with Light. But Gold reminded her again, for Light's safety, it was better to avoid sleeping carelessly. Gold also said that Nemumu should reduce her loyalty because Light might one day hate her. Nemumu's eyes immediately filled with tears, but she insisted on continuing to protect Light. Light just chuckled at their behavior, then said he would never hate them. The 3 of them were now an adventuring team that would travel the surface world. Light now stated that his first destination was Sasha, but they couldn't attack immediately. Light wanted to gather information first because he was sure his enemies also possessed mysterious powers and gifts like his own. Nemumu briefly said there wouldn't be anyone as strong as Light. But Light felt that precisely because he existed, there must be others as well. Moreover, the master figure that all nations feared was clearly no ordinary person. Anger began to rise in Light's small body, his fists clenched tighter, his eyes glowing. If necessary, he would burn the world. Gold and Nemumu started to tremble, but Light took a breath, put on his disguise mask, and invited his 2 companions to continue their journey. They immediately flew towards the city of Degas, the territory of the Dwarf Kingdom, where a new dungeon had been discovered. As they neared the city, they descended in the middle of a forest. Suddenly, a commotion was heard. It turned out a carriage was being attacked by dwarf bandits. Gold stood out significantly because his armor gleamed like the sun, immediately alerting the bandits to their presence. The bandits instantly issued threats, glaring viciously, especially at Nemumu, who was a woman. Light gave the command. Gold was to handle the ones hiding in the trees, but not to kill them. Light and Nemumu advanced toward the carriage. The bandits immediately rushed out and attacked Gold, but all their weapons were instantly destroyed upon hitting Gold's armor. One of the bandits stared dumbfounded, and before he could think, he was flicked and sent flying far away. Gold stood tall, teaching them about the spirit of a knight. Light tried to talk the bandits into surrendering, but they scoffed at a little boy like Light because their levels were above 200. But before they could lay a finger on Light, Nemumu was behind them and quickly one hit KO'd them one by one. Oi boys. For your information, Light has a pseudonym here. Dark Sama or Kuro-sama, depending on the translator, specifically when he wears his clown mask. This name is used during this mission of disguise and information gathering, and will likely be used often in the future. So hopefully, you won't be confused. Light immediately crouched down, asking the old man and the child they saved if they were okay. They could only stare, amazed, and confused, asking who this group really was. After everything was settled, the family allowed Light and his team to ride with them in the carriage to the city. Along the way, The father asked if they were famous adventurers. But Light said this was actually the first time they would be registering at the guild. Finally, the carriage arrived in Dagus. Before parting ways, the father informed Light that he owned an inn specifically for humans if Light needed a place. They said their goodbyes, and Light immediately entered the city. Gold and Nemumu were amazed by the city, having never seen the surface world directly before. They continued walking to the massive guild building, bustling with various races, chatting, looking for work, or just hanging out. Light led them to register immediately. But once the registration process was complete, Nemumu became extremely upset because Light's immense level and power were only given rank F. Even though everyone who just registered also received rank F, Nemumu couldn't accept it. She slammed her hand on the counter, demanding the clerk immediately give Light rank SSSS. Light just smiled calmly, apologizing to the clerk for his friend's behavior, and said starting from F was fine, because this was just the beginning, and the revenge has just begun. After the registration business was done, Light, Gold, and Nemumu left the guild and headed straight for the inn. But the atmosphere was slightly awkward, because Nemumu was sitting on the floor with a guilty expression. Nemumu felt terrible for causing Light to have to apologize for her outburst at the registration counter. But Light didn't show any annoyance and continued walking with them to find the inn. They didn't just choose any place to stay. Their choice fell on a place named Colonel, the inn belonging to the man they had saved earlier. As soon as they arrived, Carnell, the inn owner, greeted them warmly, promising to give them the best service. But Light immediately interrupted and said he had 3 selfish requests he wanted fulfilled during their stay there. First, he wanted to stay for a full month. Second, he wanted the entire top floor for themselves. Third, he didn't want a single staff member to go up to that floor during their stay. Without much fuss, Light immediately handed over a pouch containing 300 gold coins and asked Carnell to consider it a gift, not a payment. Carnell thought about it, but finally agreed and showed them to the top floor. Once they were alone, Light immediately took out several cards and began applying effects to the room, making the room soundproof from the outside, rejecting all external magic, and being able to detect people's presence nearby. Gold, curious about the money, asked, and Light explained that the coins were genuine, obtained from their associates operating as merchants on the surface. Light deliberately didn't want to use fake money in this place because he was afraid of causing trouble. While Light could actually create unlimited money using his gacha skill, he preferred not to disrupt the world's economic balance. Nemumu briefly interjected, suggesting they send more people from the abyss because she felt it would be safer. But Light immediately radiated a cold aura, gave her a sharp look, and asked if she meant to steal the opportunity for revenge from Light's hands. Nemumu instantly trembled, apologizing while kneeling, and even started crying. Gold instead burst out laughing, saying that Light could definitely handle everything himself. Light finally gave Nemumu time to calm down, even apologizing for losing his temper. But Nemumu still felt guilty and said she wanted to prove her loyalty again. Nemumu immediately sat down, took off Light's shoes, and kissed Light's toes, a symbolic act of an oath as a loyal slave, although Light himself didn't like the custom. For Light, it was rather embarrassing. Gold, who was there, immediately teased them, making the atmosphere more awkward. But Light didn't mind. Light told both of them that tomorrow's main priority was to delve into the dungeon until Aries' plan was finished. In the morning, the area around the dungeon was already very crowded. Small markets lined the streets selling necessities for adventurers, from food, potions, to weapons. The sight made the 3 of them stop for a moment to enjoy the bustle. Light looked towards the large gate where people were queuing to enter in an orderly fashion. Gold noticed that only humans, beastmen, and dwarves were queuing. Light explained that elves were not welcome in that area due to the long history of animosity between elves and dwarves. Many eyes started glancing at the 3 of them. They were indeed conspicuous, especially with their unique walking formation. Nemumu was always very close behind Light. Although Light was slightly awkward, he complied because the formation was Nemumu's suggestion. Suddenly, a hooded group cut the line. Light, Gold, and Nemumu immediately took note of their movements. The person in front was small but appeared trained, while the other 2 looked much weaker. The atmosphere started to become uncomfortable because the people behind them debated whether to protest or not. They were afraid of making a wrong move if the group cutting the line was from another race. But Light didn't stand idly by. Light immediately stepped forward and calmly admonished the hooded group, telling them to queue properly. The group was offended at being told off by a small boy who seemed to have no power whatsoever. They asked back who Light really was to order them around. But Light responded casually, asking back how they could know who they were if their faces were covered by hoods. Gold also agreed, nodding with satisfaction at the response. Nemumu immediately spoke in an annoyed tone, telling them to go back to the end of the line. The people around them shouted and complained about the robed group's behavior, but the mysterious man grew angrier and was about to draw a weapon covered in cloth. The person next to him quickly told the man to calm down, saying it wasn't the time to use that item. Clenching his teeth to hold back his emotion, the man stalked off with his friends. People immediately applauded Light and his two friends, calling them very brave. The group whose place was cut immediately approached Light and thanked him. One of them asked Gold about his golden armor, because everyone must be curious. Just as Gold was about to answer, Nemumu immediately interrupted and said the armor was fake, that it wouldn't be efficient if it were pure gold. Light actually knew the armor was mostly made of real gold, but he let people think otherwise for safety. The leader of another group asked if the three of them were entering the dungeon for the first time, as they didn't bring any camping gear. Light said they just wanted to look around the place first. When it was their turn to enter, the dwarf gatekeeper called them. It was time to enter, and the two groups separated. The three of them briefly wondered whether to reveal their item boxes or not, but they finally decided to postpone it. Perhaps they would think about it once they were inside the dungeon. Nemumu briefly asked about the dungeon itself, as all dungeons had their own unique characteristics. But Light knew that the secret of a dungeon could only be uncovered if they found something called a dungeon core. Even Elidono, the most skilled in magic, didn't fully understand dungeon cores. The clue was in the myth of the world's creation. The world was initially dark until a goddess spread light and created the land and the 9 races. Then, from the swirling light, an evil god was born who loved the goddess but became trapped beneath the world the goddess created. That evil god released monsters from the dungeon, which was said to be a hole to reach the goddess. Well, those monsters appeared to disrupt the balance of the world, and the 9 races had to fight to protect the goddess. It is said that the dungeon core is a fragment of the evil god that absorbs starlight and magic, then creates dungeons complete with treasures, materials, monsters, and even different environments. After walking for quite a while in the dark corridor, light began to appear. As soon as they reached the first floor, the atmosphere was like a different world from the surface. Forests, sky, and the damp, characteristic dungeon atmosphere immediately greeted them. Meanwhile, the hooded group who cut the line were also walking on the first floor of the dungeon. One of them realized it was getting late, and another was furious because their plan was ruined due to their late entry into the dungeon. They were still stuck on the first floor, all because they were pushed to the back of the line by Light and his team. A growling sound began to be heard from the bushes, and it turned out they were surrounded by wild boars. The angry man immediately drew his weapon and began hacking all the monsters down. His face still clearly recalled the incident at the queue, and his anger was vented on the monsters. He leaped into the air and plunged his sword into the ground, muttering about his identity. His name was Kaito, one of the strongest white knights of the Elf Kingdom, a successor to the Master's bloodline. Kaito checked his status and was annoyed that his level wasn't rising, even though he had defeated quite a few enemies. One of his companions, Yanaku, a half-spectacled dark elf, tried to calm Kaito down and reminded him that their target was the troll monster on the 3rd floor, not these weak creatures on the early floors. Kaito was still frustrated, worried he had hit a wall at level 1,500. Even though the Master's blood flowed in his body, he desperately wanted to be a hero blessed by the goddess. Yanaku said he understood Kaito's feelings, even adding a little drama about his own past, and promised to help Kaito level up for their goal. Kaito briefly wondered why he was working with a dark elf, but took it as a test from the goddess to achieve his dream. Meanwhile, Light, Gold, and Nemumu had reached the 3rd floor and defeated all the trolls with ease. Light instructed them to gather materials and magic stones from the golems for evidence. Although, in terms of resources, they had more than enough just from Light's gacha skill. Light realized they were all dirty and said it was time to go back to the surface. Nemumu immediately became enthusiastic, suggesting she help bathe Light, but Gold immediately mocked her again. They ascended back to the first floor. During their flight, Light saw the friendly group they had helped earlier at the queue. But now, the group was surrounded by goblins. Nemumu said they weren't worth saving, and Gold said they could most likely defeat them on their own. But Light explained they were being too focused forward. A bush snake was crawling from behind and was about to bite Mia, the girl in the group. If it happened, Mia would be completely paralyzed by the poison. Light immediately restrained the snake and crushed its head. The group immediately thanked Light, but the atmosphere turned tense when fast footsteps came from behind the trees. A pack of wolves ran out of the forest, but it turned out the wolves were fleeing from something. From behind the trees, a large monster with 4 scythe-like arms appeared. Its name was the 4-scythe mantis. Ario immediately panicked and explained that the monster was extremely rare, only appearing once every 30 years, and it should have been eradicated 10 years ago. So why had it reappeared? Ario also explained that the monster was level 500 and suggested they all flee together. But Light instead asked, if everyone ran away, did that mean he and his team were free to defeat the monster? Ario still urged them to escape, but Light remained confident they could face the creature. Gold stepped forward, starting to strike, but all his attacks were blocked by the mantis, without any damage. Light tried using Fire Arrow, but it also failed. Ario panicked, explaining that the monster's scythes had high magic resistance and were extremely sharp. Gold remained calm and said that a shield wasn't just for defense. When the mantis tried to attack, Gold used his shield to parry and immediately broke one of its sides. From there, the battle turned into a sort of tutorial session. Gold explained how to fight this type of monster while cutting the scythes one by one. Light took his turn, summoning dozens of fire arrows, then directing them all at the mantis. Mia was incredibly amazed at Light's power. All the fire arrows gathered and burned one of the monster's scythes. The mantis tried to flee, but Light created a wall of fire to block it. The mantis spread its wings and tried to fly, but Nemumu had already flown up and sliced the monster into pieces. Nemumu landed elegantly, but immediately apologized because she had cut all the valuable parts of the monster so they couldn't be sold. Light forgave her without a problem. Ario, Mia, and their group watched the 3 of them in awe and began to wonder who these 3 people really were. Ario even suspected they might be rank A adventurers, or perhaps even rank S. When Ario spoke admiringly of Light's power, Light was very relaxed and explained that the 3 of them had only just registered as adventurers, so their rank was still F. Gold immediately suggested they talk about it later and focus on collecting the magic stones first. But Light said they had to clean up the mess Nemumu made first. Not long after, Ario's group helped out, and Mia summoned a large water sphere for everyone to wash their hands. Clean water was very expensive inside the dungeon, so the presence of someone like Mia, who could create pure water out of thin air, was amazing. Light could sense the sincerity of the group as adventurers and thank them. Mia then walked closer to Light and apologized for only thanking him after being saved from the bush snake earlier. Enthusiastically, Mia expressed her gratitude until she accidentally bit her own tongue. Mia's face immediately turned red with embarrassment. Gold reminded Light that they had to leave quickly before other monsters arrived. But Ario had another idea and suggested they come to their camp, which wasn't far from there. The sun was starting to set, and walking at night in the dungeon was very dangerous. Ario also said he wanted to repay Light and his friend's kindness, and Mia also had questions about magic control that only Light could answer. Light finally agreed, and the 3 of them followed Ario's group to have dinner together and rest. While eating and relaxing, Mia learned that Light's parents were also mages. She began to think that might be why Light was so powerful. Light also said Mia was amazing for her age, but Mia felt the praise was excessive because she felt she still couldn't cast tactical magic without incantations like Light. Ario, who was eating and chewing slowly, asked his sister about the differences between all types of magic. Mia immediately snapped at her brother, while explaining that magic was divided into three: combat, tactical, and strategic. Combat magic, like fire arrows, is for close-range fighting. Tactical magic is for a wider radius, like the wall of fire Light used. And strategic magic is at a disaster level, like meteors, tsunamis, or earthquakes, requiring many mages to cast together. Being able to use tactical magic alone was proof that someone was a first-class mage. Races like dragon newts, dark elves, and demons could pass that test. But for humans, it was like a high wall that couldn't be jumped over. Mia felt both admiration and envy, because Light could do all of that so easily, without incantation. And she believed they were witnessing new history being written right before their eyes. Nemumu immediately stood up and laughed with satisfaction, saying Mia had good eyes for understanding how great Light's power was. Gold immediately started teasing, and finally, their conversation became lively. Light and Ario even apologized to each other for the commotion. Ario said his sister was indeed talented, even receiving a direct recommendation from the principality to enter their magic school. Light was immediately interested and asked, "What is the principality?" Ario explained that the principality was a combined nation of the 9 races, and their magic school was considered the best for seekers of magical knowledge. Gold was curious and asked why they hadn't entered the school yet. Ario explained that their parents had passed away and they didn't have the income to pay for school fees or to live on their own. That's why they met up with their childhood friends again and worked together as adventurers, saving money so Mia could go to school later. But Mia instead said she was happy to be together like they were now. Mia asked Ario not to do anything reckless, and Ario promised to take care of himself. Light said again that Mia would surely reach her goal. But Mia felt Light was just comforting her. Light said, "That's exactly what I believe. For a human to be able to use magic was rare enough, let alone Mia, who had natural talent. Light himself could only use magic because of his gacha card, not because of pure talent like Mia." Mia thanked him for his words. Ario then asked why Light decided to become an adventurer. Light answered with a lie, saying his parents died in a fire and he suffered severe burns, which is why he was now looking for a potion to heal those wounds. Nemumu added to the lie, saying Light's burns were very serious. One of Ario's group members chimed in and asked if Gold and Nemumu were dating. Nemumu immediately got angry and said who would ever want someone with no taste like Gold? And Gold shot back, saying who would want a flat-chested girl like Nemumu? He preferred mature women the color of gold. Kimura asked if he had a chance to get close to Nemumu, but was immediately rejected outright. Nemumu said she only liked light. Mia could only remain silent, thinking about age gap relationships like in dramas. The conversation flowed casually and was filled with laughter until they finally went to sleep to prepare for the next day. Meanwhile, on the 3rd floor of the dungeon, Kaito and Yanaku were still busy looking for troll materials. Kaito started to get annoyed and asked how long they had to be there, but Yanaku said his research on how to break through racial limits was almost complete. Their next experimental target was humanity. It had been 2 weeks since Light and his team entered the dungeon, and it was time for them to return to the surface. The path to the gate was full of people, making the journey up quite slow. Many people began to recognize Light and his team. They were already famous with the nickname the Dark Clown Mask or the Black Clown Mask Party LOL, who supposedly managed to defeat the 4-scythe mantis with only 3 people. Nemumu was shocked when she learned their name had spread, and Light was happy because they were starting to gain attention. Ario and his group came to greet them after a long time. They brought a gift for Light, a medicinal potion for his supposedly severe burns. Light paused for a moment before thanking them, and in return, Light gave Mia a special bracelet that could grant small miracles if used while sincerely wishing for something. Mia accepted the gift with a bright smile and immediately thanked him. Nemumu sulked because she didn't get a gift. Gold immediately nudged her and told Nemumu to stop before she embarrassed Light. As soon as they entered the dungeon again, they immediately flew to the next floor. Nemumu briefly asked about the bracelet, why Light would give such a good item for a cheap potion. Light said it wasn't a fair trade, but he was happy because Mia cared. After that, they reached the 5th floor of the dungeon, which was covered in snow. Light told Namumu and Gold to deal with the Yeti monsters there, while he himself would return to the abyss. Light took out a card and immediately teleported out of the dungeon. The 5th floor was safe for teleportation because of its vast size. Upon arriving in the abyss, everyone welcomed Light, who was finally back after being away for quite some time. Mei brought tea, and Light told her about their journey, including meeting good people like Mia and Ario. Mei was very happy to hear the news. Ellie came in and gave an update on Sasha's revenge plan, which was almost ready and only needed 10 more days. Light praised Ellie's work and ordered her to continue preparations, Mei to manage the abyss, and Aoyuki to guard the forest. Nazuna entered excitedly, looking for a task, but Light was still hesitant because Nazuna was impulsive. Finally, Nazuna was tasked with guarding the abyss from strong enemies, and she immediately became enthusiastic, urging Ellie to hurry up with the preparations. Ellie just sighed and left with Nazuna. Light sat comfortably, continuing to drink his tea. In his eyes was a sense of satisfaction and excitement, while imagining Sasha's expression when she would eventually sink into despair. On the 3rd floor of the Daggis dungeon, 2 night guards sat near a campfire chatting, named Gilbert and Subalon. Subalon asked Gilbert about the Dark Clown Mask Party. Gilbert said he didn't know, so Subalon explained that they were a group rumored to have reached the 5th floor in just a few days, and managed to defeat the Forsyth Mantis with only 3 people, even using tactical magic without incantations. Gilbert didn't believe it, but Subalon insisted because many people reportedly witnessed it. Maybe this was a sign of change, for humans to finally be respected. After chatting for a while, Subalon excused himself to relieve himself. But when he returned, he saw a horrific sight: Kaido standing on top of his friend's severed head. Subalon was shocked but quickly thought things through. Knowing his limits, he decided to flee and report to the guild. He threw a smoke bomb and ran towards the swamp, thinking he was safe. But suddenly, something attacked him from behind and made him fall. Subalon tried to get up but immediately passed out after being hit by Yanaku. The Dark Elf was annoyed seeing all the chaos Kaido had created. Kaido just sneered and said humans were annoying and deserved to die. Yanaku agreed and said he would teach humans a lesson through his new experiment. He became even more enthusiastic about gathering new and replacement materials from inside the dungeon. Meanwhile, Mia was sitting, looking at the bracelet from Light, smiling to herself. Her friends started teasing her, and Mia could only murmur shyly. After bringing back the loot from the dungeon's 5th floor, Light, Gold, and Nemumu headed straight to the shop to hand over all the Yeti magic stones they had collected. The female shop clerk immediately greeted them enthusiastically, her face lighting up when she saw the pile of glistening magic stones. Offers of food and sake immediately flew from her mouth, but Light calmly replied that he didn't need any of that and just told the woman to count the magic stones they submitted first. Gold and Nemumu could only stare blankly, recalling how different the woman's attitude was now compared to when they first arrived. Back then, they were considered scammers just for bringing so many items from the dungeon, and were even verbally abused because of their race. But now the woman immediately bowed, apologizing sincerely while promising that all staff would be warned not to make baseless accusations again. The woman even pleaded with Light to continue selling their loot at the shop and announced that their group had officially been promoted from F rank to D rank. Nemumu protested, demanding they skip ranks again, but the woman said they needed another major achievement to move up. Light suddenly got an idea when the woman mentioned a difficult quest that would be announced soon. Before he could ask further, a loud noise was heard from outside. Several dwarves entered carrying wanted posters and announced an emergency quest from the guild. The case was serious because adventurers were being found mysteriously dead, and all the victims were confirmed to have been killed in a fight. Worse yet, the perpetrator was suspected of deliberately targeting humans. If not addressed immediately, other races could also become victims. The dwarf tossed the posters into the air, loudly talking about the bounty that was now officially set. Light picked up one of the posters and asked the shop clerk if this was the quest she mentioned. The answer was yes, and without further talk, they immediately left. Nemumu asked if Light would pursue the murderers, but Gold answered first, saying this kind of quest was perfect for them now, especially since they needed action to raise their rank. But Light's face immediately turned serious. For Light, this quest wasn't just about rank, but about protecting others from the cruel killers who were at large. That night, at the inn, the three of them began to discuss a plan. The problem was, they had no information about the perpetrator's identity. Gold briefly asked if Light had a card from his gift that could help with identification, but Light wasn't sure such a card would appear. While they were talking, the floor suddenly trembled, and dark energy appeared in the middle of the room, as if tearing reality apart. They all immediately went on alert, ready to fight, but what emerged was not a monster, but someone who immediately fell and was caught by Light. The figure was none other than Mia, in a state of severe injury. Light was shocked and immediately focused on helping Mia, laying her weak body on the bed and administering first aid. The bracelet Light had given Mia suddenly shattered and fell to the floor. From that, Light realized the bracelet had most likely performed its small miracle and transported Mia directly to his location. A few hours earlier, on the first floor of the Dagas dungeon, Ario and his group had just heard the news about the adventurer murderer. One person there said the killer would be active on the second floor and advised them to leave as soon as possible. Mia immediately panicked, telling Ario that the killer was most likely an elite mage and they wouldn't be able to fight them. Ario immediately ordered his group to turn back, even though it meant their journey was in vain. They tried to avoid the center of the second floor to reduce the risk of encountering the killer, but they still didn't manage to walk as far as they had hoped. In the middle of their discussion about the next step, three hooded figures suddenly appeared. One of them immediately greeted them and asked what they were doing there. Yanaku appeared, laughing and pretending to be friendly, but the atmosphere started to feel tense. Ario told them about the rumor of the killer, and Kaido immediately responded that they were indeed looking for prey. Ario's and the others' faces immediately paled when they realized they were talking directly to the murderers. Mia immediately tugged at her brother's arm in fear, but Ario could only try to keep calm while drawing his sword. His two friends were also ready to protect Mia and told her to flee, but it was all for nothing. The already furious Kaito immediately sliced Ario with one swing. Ario's stomach was instantly ripped open and blood splattered. Mia could only cry when she saw her brother fall. Wardy and Kimura were still trying to stand, but Kaito casually sliced their bodies, splitting them in half. Yanaku could only yell for Kaido to stop, afraid there would be no more experimental materials. But Kaido casually replied that anyone who dared to resist must die. Yanaku grumbled about Kaido's lack of patience, but compromised, as long as Mia wasn't killed. Kaido said he just needed to vent his emotions. Mia, still sitting, trembling, fully realized how horrific the situation was. Especially when Kaito started walking towards her, the elf's eyes filled with malicious intent. Yanaku only warned Kaito to call him when he was finished, then left the area, leaving Mia in great danger alone. Kaito stood, scratching his head, seriously confused, when he saw Mia so scared and trying to flee. In his mind, all human girls would consider it an honor to be embraced by a male elf. In fact, Kaido thought Mia was just being shy and hoped Mia would wail with happiness. But all those delusions were immediately shattered when the dying Ario suddenly rose again, enduring his pain while telling his sister to flee. Kaito was surprised and immediately turned towards Ario with an annoyed expression. Ario could only look at his dead friends with a gaze full of grief. But he still forced himself to stand, leaning on his sword, gasping for breath. Yanaku, seeing this, was actually impressed by Ario's resilience and told Kaito to capture Ario alive because he could be good experimental material. Ario was well aware that his life was a matter of time, but what mattered now was not life or death, but Mia's safety. He glanced at his still crying sister and gave her a warm smile, as if to say that Mia had to escape now. Mia, seeing that look, recklessly ran, even though her legs were still trembling and her breath was hitched. Kaito was about to chase, but Ario immediately attacked first, trying to strike Kaito with his remaining strength. Kaito managed to parry the attack, clearly annoyed by the interruption. But Ario didn't retreat. Ario's desperate attempt actually impressed Yanaku even more, who reminded Kaito not to kill him. Kaito's face looked bored mixed with disgust. Ario slowly spoke internally, remembering the lesson Gold had taught him 2 weeks ago. The technique was to fight the enemy while pretending to be uninterested. Ario tried to look away and divert his gaze, creating a gap for his attack to land. Although the difference in their levels was immense, that moment was enough for Ario to throw his shield at Kaito. Kaito instinctively dodged, and that's where the opening appeared. Ario immediately charged and slammed his shield into Kaito's face. Although it dealt no damage at all, Kaito momentarily fell to the ground with a shocked expression. At that moment, Ario stood over Kaito, grinning smugly, feeling he had won because he had managed to make the elf fall. But all that did not last long. Kaito, now utterly enraged, immediately summoned a magic sword and stabbed Ario from below. Ario's body was thrown into the air, coughing up blood, before falling to the ground and was most likely dead. Kaito was about to continue torturing Ario, but Yanaku stopped him and said it was enough. It was better to focus on chasing Mia, because if Mia escaped and told outsiders, their identity would be exposed. Mia herself was running as fast as she could, gasping for breath from crying and exhaustion. Only one thing was on her mind. She had to survive and inform people about these adventurer murderers. All her friends and her brother had sacrificed themselves to give her time to escape. But that hope was immediately shattered when sudden flying magic swords appeared and blocked her path. Mia was startled, falling to the ground and screaming. Kaito appeared, standing on one of the flying swords. Feeling satisfied that he had captured Mia, he began to boast, explaining the sword he was using. It was a phantom-grade sword legacy of Grambius, which could create clones and be ridden for flight. Mia clenched her fist, knowing she couldn't give up now. Everyone had given their lives for her, so Mia had to keep fighting. Mia stood up and began chanting a spell to make ice blades appear around her, which she then sent towards Kaito as a diversion. While continuing to run, Mia kept sending ice blades to hinder Kaito's pursuit, but the elf was irritated and finally launched the sword he was riding directly at Mia. The blade sliced her leg, causing Mia to fall again. Despite the agonizing pain, Mia still forced herself to get up and walk. Kaito slowly walked toward her, telling Mia she should just give up and surrender herself to him for the sake of the hero's future. Mia looked at Kaito with a sharp gaze full of anger. Then Mia said that Kaito was not a hero or a legend, but just a coward who enjoyed oppressing the weak and was not worthy of being called a hero. Those words immediately made Kaito's mind falter. His memories flashed back to the past, to everyone in the Elf Kingdom who had said the same thing to him. All those insults made Kaito even more enraged. He yelled in anger and summoned numerous magic swords to launch a final attack. Mia could only look up with eyes that were starting to surrender. Fear filled her chest, knowing that death was very near. But she couldn't die. Not yet. She had to tell Light about all of this. And in the last second, before all those swords attacked, a black rift suddenly appeared from the air. Kaito was utterly shocked because Mia suddenly disappeared from the spot. He mistakenly thought Mia could use teleportation magic, but it didn't make sense for someone of such a low level to use high-level magic. Yanaku was no less surprised. He also thought Kaito had successfully finished off Mia, but her body was gone from the spot. He panicked even more because besides surviving, Mia had also seen the Grambius sword. He was afraid she might report it to the Central Guild, and undesirable things would happen. Both Yanaku and Kaito panicked at that possibility, because the average Central Guild captain could be around level 3,000, and the knights there were generally around level 2,000, which was no match for Kaito's level of only around 1,500. They both planned that the continuation of their research might be carried out elsewhere if their actions were discovered by the Central Guild. But before they could think further, the Death Child, Light, suddenly appeared there in his robe, looking furious at what had happened to his friends who were lying lifeless on the ground. Kaito and Yanaku were shocked by the sudden arrival of someone they hadn't sensed. They were also confused about where he came from, and Kaito even thought that even with his level 1,500, he hadn't noticed his arrival. Light approached all his lifeless comrades and touched them, seeing Kimura and Morty tragically deceased. Gold suddenly arrived, carrying Ario's severely injured body, but fortunately, he was still alive. Gold said he had administered first aid to Ario so he could at least survive. Light murmured to himself about what had happened to all his companions. They only wanted to live a normal life in a world where humans were discriminated against. They struggled hard to survive and earn money for Mia. Light said that even though he hadn't known Wardy and the others for long, if he could meet them again, they might have become close and relaxed friends with each other. Light was furious at Kaito and Yanaku, who were still strutting around. He said he would never forgive the two of them. But ludicrously, Yanaku tried to joke, saying there seemed to be a misunderstanding. Yanaku claimed that when they arrived, the victims were already severely injured and they were trying to heal them all. But the bottom line was that they were afraid of being reported to the Central Guild Association. But all of Yanaku's drivel didn't work to fool Light, because he had previously gathered information from Mia using his hypnosis technique, and now knew everything. Yanaku and Kaito suddenly panicked, genuinely thinking they had been reported to the Central Guild Association. But Light said he hadn't reported them yet. That response made Kaito happy and feel lucky. He thought, since no one had reported them yet, he should finish off Light and his companion right now. He also boasted that he had been blessed by the god to become a legendary hero. Light calmly countered that all of Kaito's talk was just a pipe dream, because Light intentionally hadn't reported them. He wanted to finish them off alone and turn the two of them into his stepping stones. Light promised they wouldn't leave here alive. Light even swore in his own name that he would kill the two of them and avenge his companions. Light then advanced towards Yanaku and Kaito. But before that, Light warned his two friends not to interfere and to just watch. Kaito, irritated by the taunts and being called a stepping stone, immediately lunged to attack with his sword. Unfortunately, the attack was easily blocked by Light using his staff. Light didn't even use any effort to fight Kaito. Yanaku, watching the one-sided fight, was stunned and shocked by what was happening. Light, who was starting to get bored with Kaito's lack of resistance, then raised his staff to hit Kaito's stomach. Although it looked slow, the attack dealt massive damage and knocked Kaito out. Light continued to mock Kaito, saying that the legendary hero master should try harder. Is that all he's got? Come on! Kaito, who refused to be belittled by a kid, immediately used the Grambius skill and created hundreds of glowing swords that hovered above him. In the midst of the battle arena, which looked like a mini-hell, Kaito appeared very confident, immediately attacking Light with the power of the Grambius sword. His movements were absolutely resolute, as if certain of victory. But it turned out Light could still dodge all of Kaito's initial attacks, even though the swords were attacking relentlessly without pause. From his movements, it was clear that Kaito was going full throttle without giving any breathing room. Yanaku, watching from the side, began to explain Grambius. It turned out it was no ordinary sword, but a weapon of the Phantom rank. This sword had the ability to create thousands of sword clones, and all of them could attack simultaneously. It was insane, like a rain of swords. But strangely, Light could still evade all of it. His movements were incredibly nimble, and his focus was completely undisturbed. Even when Kaito suddenly attacked from behind, Light still managed to parry the attack calmly, even though the situation was extremely chaotic. In that moment, Light started showing his trump card. Light activated his unlimited gacha skill as a rearguard. With that skill, Light could instantly cast magic that was above first-class mage level, and it turned out what he summoned was ice sword magic. Instantly, thousands of ice swords appeared, flying in the air, ready to meet the Grambius attack. Kaito was incredibly surprised, his expression instantly changing when he saw the ice swords emerging from the air. The battle immediately turned into a massive sword war between Grambius and Ice Sword. Thousands of swords collided in the air. The sight was truly insane, like a war between two great powers from another world. Yanaku was no less shocked. It turned out the ice sword magic had enough power to counterbalance Grambius. From the start, the Phantom Sword was thought to be unbeatable by ordinary weapons or magic, but Light proved otherwise. In that moment, Light also became serious. Gone was the relaxed demeanor from before. His energy began to change. The fighting aura became stronger. It seemed Light had decided not to hold back anymore. Kaito became even more confident, raising Grambius high and saying that the sword was a national treasure of the Elf Kingdom. Grambius was also not just any sword, but a direct blessing from the Master. This immediately startled Light. It turned out Kaito also knew about the Master, and Light immediately questioned Kaito about it. Without hesitation, Kaito replied that he was a descendant who carried the Master's blood. He was no ordinary person, but the future hero who was said to continue the Master's legacy himself. In the middle of the high-pressure arena, Kaito stood with a cynical smile, confidently boasting that his status had now risen to that of a submaster existing in this world. Without further ado, Light immediately spoke to Gold and Nemumu, informing them of the plan to bring Kaito to the Abyss. The goal was clear, not for a trip, but to give Kaito a lesson he would never forget. Meanwhile, the task of dealing with Yanaku was handed over to Gold and Nemumu. It didn't take long for Yanaku to become overly confident. Instead of panicking or being afraid, he seemed delighted because he felt he would gain interesting new research subjects. With annoying enthusiasm, Yanaku immediately summoned two massive chimera monsters that looked ready to wreak havoc. Yanaku explained with a proud smile that these two monsters had powers that had surpassed the limit of human growth, even successfully breaking their limits. But instead of being impressive, it only made Light more annoyed, not because of their strength, but because the two monsters turned out to be mere test subjects for Yanaku's insane experiments. Nemumu, who had been silent all this time, immediately moved swiftly, without hesitation. With a single swing of her sword, the head of one of the monsters fell off before it could even fight back. On the other side, Gold remained calm while carrying Ario, who was still unconscious. But none of this made Yanaku panic. He continued to summon new monsters again, as if the previous two monsters meant nothing. On the other side, the fight between Light and Kaito intensified. Kaito was now serious and immediately raised the Grambius sword high, ready to unleash his strongest technique. Meanwhile, the newly summoned monsters attacked Gold and Nemumu. But the duo remained relaxed, clearly showing they weren't threatened at all. Even while protecting Ario, they looked composed. Nemumu finally spoke up. All this time, it wasn't because she couldn't use her skills, but she was just lazy to use skills against enemies she deemed trivial. But because she didn't want Light to wait too long, Nemumu and Gold decided to get serious. Nemumu unleashed a skill called Absolute Death, while Gold released the skill Judgment Flare. It didn't take long. The two monsters were immediately defeated before they could fight back. Everything turned to dust in an instant. Yanaku was stunned, extremely shocked that his two new monsters were also instantly defeated, and worse, they couldn't be resummoned. Still in a state of confusion and disbelief, Nemumu immediately stepped forward and, without hesitation, kicked Yanaku's butt hard. Yanaku's scream broke loud, his cries echoing because Nemumu's kick successfully hit a vital spot, causing his testicles to rupture. On the other side, Kaito was deeply focused. Electric energy from the big Grambius he held began to surge everywhere, making the surrounding atmosphere feel like a minor apocalypse. Kaito raised his sword high, then slashed it into the ground with full force. Lightning immediately exploded like a furious thunder strike. The ground shook and dust flew everywhere. But Light, who had been waiting, simply leaped calmly into the air, then landed lightly as if weightless. That powerful attack didn't touch him at all. Kaito didn't give up. The Grambius sword was swung again brutally, creating energy waves that spun in all directions. But Light casually dodged again, his movements extremely fluid while muttering that the so-called legendary sword was actually quite ordinary. Given Kaito's earlier boasts, Grambius sounded like a divine artifact. Stung by the insult, Kaito immediately flared up. He couldn't accept being called weak, especially by a nameless kid. Kaito immediately went berserk. The sword was swung wildly, full of power and emotion. He claimed it was a lethal attack that would finish Light in one blow. But when the sword actually reached Light's body, Light merely raised his shoulder to block the attack. No weapon, no shield, just his shoulder. And Amusingly, Light's expression remained flat, like someone who had just woken up. Kaido became even more furious. He was gasping for breath, but still desperately tried to keep slashing, even though he was clearly failing. But Light was tired. As if he had had enough of dealing with a tantruming child, Light finally said it was enough. Then he immediately kicked Kaido's stomach with serious power. Kaito was instantly sent flying and fell face down, his face hitting the dirt, completely breathless. Light took the time to say that this pain was just the beginning. There was much more pain that would be given to Kaito and also to Yanaku. Kaito, who had lost his mind, suddenly prostrated himself before Light, begging for forgiveness. But Light wouldn't let him off that easily. All the previous events were still vividly clear. Kaito had mercilessly killed other parties, and some of Light's friends had also been victims of Kaito's madness. Light finally said he would give them one last chance. He offered a rematch, but with one condition. If Kaito and Yanaku could defeat Light, they would be free, completely free. And to guarantee that promise, Light swore on his own name. Light told Kaito to stand up and retrieve his sword. But instead of taking it, Kaito panicked. Without thinking much, he immediately turned around and ran as fast as he could. Just a few steps into his escape, Kaito's leg was shot with a solar ray. A golden light flashed and pierced Kaito's leg, making him fall again while screaming in pain. Light looked at Kaito and said that Mia's words all along were true. Kaito was utterly unworthy of being a hero, nothing more than a loser brat who was only brave when ahead, but immediately cowered when the tables turned. After all the chaos was settled, they finally began to clean up. The bodies of Yanaku and Kaito were tied tightly to the ground, so they couldn't do anything else. But Kaito was still rambling incoherently. His mouth couldn't stop. Amidst his rambling, Light suddenly seemed to remember something. It turned out Kaito and Yanaku were the two people who had cut in line at the dungeon entrance earlier. No wonder they had been annoying from the start. Not wanting to waste time, Light immediately invited everyone to teleport to the Abyss, the main base where Light and his team usually gathered. As soon as they arrived there, they were immediately greeted by the beautiful maids who were accustomed to handling Light's needs. But the maids' expressions immediately turned fierce when they learned Light had brought two people who had harassed him and his party. One of the maids, Nazuna, was so heated she wanted to immediately mince Kaito and Yanaku on the spot. But Light immediately stopped her, saying, "Not yet." Because these two people held important information about the existence of the Master, the figure who was still a mystery and a threat to many parties. For now, Light entrusted the still unconscious Ario to Gold and the others. They were asked to guard Ario until his condition was stable. But the calm atmosphere didn't last long because Yanaku started rambling, blaming Kaito. He claimed everything he did was because Kaito threatened him. But Light could no longer be fooled, as he knew full well that Yanaku was the one who had been carrying out experiments on innocent humans. And from there, Light began to get aggressive. A sadistic interrogation immediately began, with Yanaku and Kaito as the main targets to extract as much information as possible. Meanwhile, on the other side, Mia finally woke up. The first thing she looked for was her brother, Ario. After waking up fully, Mia realized she was in a luxurious room. Not long after, Light came into the room and began to explain everything. From the conversation, Mia received the news that Ario was still alive and being treated. But that good news was immediately accompanied by bad news, because Kimura and Wardy, two party members who were also Mia's close friends, could not be saved. All that remained of them was their hair. Hearing this, Mia immediately burst into tears. The sense of loss was truly agonizing. Light gave Mia time to be alone and quietly left the room, allowing Mia to grieve alone in the suffocating silence. On that bright morning, the atmosphere in Light's home felt calmer than usual. Mia and Ario were finally fully conscious after all the chaos they had endured. Now, they were sitting comfortably with Gold and the others, having tea and light conversation. The moment felt like a point of peace after a storm, especially after many difficult events they had gone through together. Mia and Ario sincerely thanked Light. They truly felt deeply indebted for the help given. Light just gave a small smirk and asked Mia about their plans for the future. Without much thought, Ario immediately said he wanted to hold a proper funeral for his fallen comrades. For Ario, they deserved an honorable farewell. Meanwhile, Mia expressed her desire to enter the magic school and study diligently to become stronger. The previous incident made Mia realize that power was not only for survival, but also for protection. After the conversation, Mia and Ario said their goodbyes from Light's home. They left with smiles and renewed spirits. There was an aura of strong determination on their faces, as if their lives had a clearer direction now. On the other side, Light also had unfinished business to settle. So Light told Gold and Nemumu to guard the house for now, because Light was going to the Abyss briefly. As soon as he arrived at the Abyss headquarters, the atmosphere immediately changed. As usual, Light was greeted by his two beautiful maids. But this time, they didn't just greet him. They gave important information about the results of the mind reading from Yanaku and Kaido. They had used forbidden magic to break open the contents of the two prisoners' minds and immediately compiled a complete report for Light to study. Light sat down and read the report slowly. Unfortunately, there was no truly crucial information, but there were a few things concerning the plan for world destruction and also about the Submaster. Although not much, the information still held strategic value. While reading the report, Ellie showed a CCTV feed displaying the condition of Kaito and Yanaku, who were completely broken from being tortured mercilessly. The chains wrapped around their bodies looked even more deeply scarred. It was clear the two men had lost the will to live. Light, seeing this, immediately decided to finish everything. Without hesitation, Light ordered the release of the SSR Feast of the Dead, a final, ultimate attack that would surely bring a tragic death to Yanaku and Kaito. There would be no mercy. This was the final form of Light's judgment for all their sins. Afterward, Ellie gave other news. The revenge plan for Sasha from the elf race was finally ready to be executed. Light immediately gave a positive response, his face looking satisfied. It was as if he had been eagerly awaiting this moment. Light immediately said to carry out the plan as soon as possible. There was no need to delay any longer, because Light couldn't wait to see Sasha's expression pleading for mercy amidst her own destruction. For Light, that was the fitting end for all the betrayal and past sins Sasha had committed. That morning, the sky was clear and cool. At a small roadside eatery, similar to an Ankringan, two people were sitting and eating with expressions of complete satisfaction. It turned out they were discussing Light's expression back when he was betrayed. They looked genuinely happy, as if that moment was their main source of entertainment. At the same time, Sasha's past began to be revealed. It turned out Sasha was an illegitimate child of the elf race. Her life wasn't easy. Her mother had been severely ill and eventually passed away. Since then, Sasha's life had become harder and filled with bitterness. But all that didn't stop Sasha's ambition. Sasha had a dark history, and she was now recounting that story to Michael. There, Sasha revealed all the secrets of her past, including Light, who was once a weakling and left for dead in the deepest dungeon because of the betrayal. Sasha told the story in detail, as if she desperately wanted Michael to know every dark side of what had happened. Sometime later, on a very comfortable carriage, the atmosphere was briefly warm. A servant sitting there spoke to Sasha about the wedding ceremony between Sasha and Michael, which was scheduled for the end of the year. The servant looked enthusiastic, as if the event was widely anticipated. But the atmosphere suddenly changed. The horses they were riding abruptly stopped. It turned out there was an unpleasant incident up ahead. An elf was torturing a weak commoner on the roadside. The situation was chaotic. Many people could only watch without being able to help. Sasha, who got out of the carriage, was immediately shocked because amidst the crowd, a figure who hadn't been seen for a long time appeared. Light showed up, walking casually. Sasha immediately shouted his name, her expression a mix of shock and disbelief. Without thinking, Sasha immediately chased after him. But when she reached the end of the alley, it turned out to be a dead end. There was no one there. All that was present was a piece of paper taped to the wall. The writing on the note was very clear. "I'll be waiting at the Great Tower." The message was like a direct challenge aimed at Sasha. Sasha was stunned. Suddenly, all her stories about Light being dead seemed questionable. Sasha was angry and panicked, afraid everyone would think she had lied about Light's death, which she had loudly proclaimed. Mixed emotions immediately raged in her head. Meanwhile, from the top of a building, Light stood calmly with Ellie. Light grinned with immense satisfaction watching Sasha's reaction. But Ellie was different. Ellie looked annoyed and emotional. This was because Ellie knew Sasha had also been involved in the torture of Light. Even though Sasha looked calm and clean-cut now, Ellie knew all those past wounds hadn't disappeared. After that, Light and Ellie left the place without much talk. The two of them had agreed on one thing. It was time for revenge against Sasha. The next plan slowly began to move, and everything would return to the beginning, but this time with a different story. Inside the majestic and mysterious elf kingdom, there were several groups of knights with their own strengths and reputations. But among them all, there was one group that was the most feared and respected: the White Knights. Their members were also not random. There was Sharfat, known for being outspoken, the sadistic twins, Kia and Nia, who treated torture like a hobby. There was Mast, whose temper exploded easily, and at the very top, the leader, Hardy, whose cold aura could turn the room into a fridge. At one time, Sharfat was talking with Hardy. In a casual but serious tone, Sharfat told him that Kaito, whom Sharfat considered god-level stupid, had taken Grambius to become an adventurer-killing machine. Sharfat also explained that while carrying out the plan, a self-proclaimed hero human boy suddenly appeared and managed to capture Kaito. So, Sharfat's plan completely failed. Upon hearing that story, Mast immediately lost his temper. Mast couldn't accept Kaito being called useless, especially since Kaito had brought Grambius, a weapon that should have made adventurers scatter. For Mast, anyone who dared to cause trouble for the White Knights group absolutely had to be taught a lesson they would never forget. Meanwhile, in the corner of the room, Kia and Nia were having fun torturing a human who was their prisoner. They looked like they were thoroughly enjoying the torture session, as if they were playing a game. But the irritated Mast briefly commented on that as well. According to Mast, rather than constantly torturing him, it was better to just kill him outright. Mast felt Kia and Nia's method was too cruel, even though they had a more efficient way to deal with prisoners. Amidst the commotion, Hardy just sat calmly, drinking tea. But as soon as the noise started sounding like a night market, Hardy raised his hand and told everyone to be silent. Without many words, the atmosphere instantly turned cold. Everyone was suddenly shocked because Hardy's aura felt like it was crushing their chests. The entire room fell silent. Sharfat, whose blood pressure had risen, was also annoyed. As a way to vent, Sharfat immediately cast a magic shot into the head of the human who was being tortured. The human's head exploded instantly, blood splattering everywhere. There was no mercy left. Hardy then ordered Kia and Nia to dispose of the body. They were told to clean up the traces so as not to leave any problems. After that, Hardy commented on Kaito. For Hardy, Kaito deserved to be caught because of his rotten personality. He had been problematic from the start. Hardy finally issued an official order to all members of the White Knights: handle this Kaito problem completely in the name of the White Knights, so that no more disgrace would drag down the Queen's name. Everything had to be dealt with before the group's reputation plummeted further. In the elf world, the legacy of the Master's blood was indeed very famous. The elf race was rumored to have inherited the most of that blood compared to other races. But it turned out that the legacy didn't automatically make them overpowered. The proof was that Hardy's level was capped at 3,000. Mast and Sharfat were each at level 2,000. The twins Kia and Nia were at 1,800, and there was one more member with glasses whose level was 2,500. People with high levels like them were usually called submasters. But even though the number of submasters had reached 20 people, Hardy spoke honestly. No new master had emerged from the elf people for thousands of years. Yet the hope for the birth of a new master had existed for a long time. Sharfat also didn't want to be outdone in commenting. Sharfat said that all the submasters were now trying very hard to level up and surpass the existing limits, but they were truly stuck. No one had been able to become a true master. Finally, Hardy stated firmly that the order to kill Kaido hadn't been issued yet, but Sharfat was still tasked with resolving this matter before everything got worse. Meanwhile, on a quiet and dark night, far from the Elf Kingdom's capital, a great tower suddenly appeared in the middle of the wilderness. Its shape was mysterious, towering high as if it had no end. No one knew what the place was, but the tower's appearance was clearly no coincidence. It could be the beginning of a bigger conflict. The sudden emergence of the giant tower standing majestically in the middle of the forest immediately caused a sensation throughout the region. Not only were the adventurers and local villagers terrified, but high-level monsters also began to emerge from their lairs. The situation became increasingly uncontrollable, especially when several elf troops arrived and began to attract the ferocious monsters using a very sadistic method. They brought a small human boy who was chained and used as live bait. The goal was to lure out monsters whose levels were in the range of 150 to 200. But because the boy was walking while trembling with fear, his steps were very slow. One of the seemingly most obnoxious elves immediately flew into a rage and started verbally abusing the boy relentlessly. But before his cursing was finished, the elf's head was suddenly severed, bitten off by a two-headed monster that appeared out of nowhere. Panic immediately spread throughout the elf troops. The two-headed monster continued to rage and eliminated all of them one by one, leaving nothing behind but the small boy who had been used as bait. The boy cried in fear while looking for a hiding place. But strangely, the brutal monster immediately left without touching the boy. Just when it seemed safe, a gang of bandits arrived and immediately targeted the boy. The boy was captured, and his wounds were then doused with a healing potion. Not out of pity, but because in their opinion, if the boy's wounds were too severe, his price would be low when sold. But it turned out these bandits weren't truly evil people. They were subordinates of Ellie, one of Light's lieutenants, and only looked scary on the outside. So their mission was indeed to save the boy. From the top of a cliff, Aoyuki and Ellie watched everything that had just happened. Aoyuki said her life was only for fighting for Light, and if anyone dared to oppose Light, they would be immediately wiped out by her. No negotiation. Then Ellie commented, asking who was the strongest between the two of them. But Aoyuki answered casually, saying that if they had never fought directly, they would never know who would win. The atmosphere was briefly very tense, like two lions ready for battle at any moment. But the tension immediately eased when a voice called Aoyuki from a distance. The voice turned out to be from a returning member of the bandit group, who reported that the mission to save the boy was complete, and the boy was now safe. The bandit group actually had a name. They were known as the Mohawk Group. They were the result of a summon from Light's Gacha skill, and their levels ranged from 15 to 30, randomly determined by Light's luck at the time. Meanwhile, in another place, Sasha was sitting alone, reading the letter from Light. Her expression was very serious. Without much thought, Sasha had only one goal: to quickly head to the location of the Great Tower and kill Light with her own hands. In the Elf Kingdom, the atmosphere suddenly became tense when Hardy reported to the high officials. In the presence of the Elf Queen herself, Hardy gave critical information, stating that more high-level monsters were now roaming the forest. This situation caused concern, especially since it was not far from the royal domain. The officials immediately took action, ordering the White Knights group to intervene to exterminate all the monsters and protect the kingdom from the increasing threat. But Hardy immediately countered, saying that deploying the White Knights group now would be completely useless. Without clear information, it could backfire. Hardy explained further, saying that what was needed now was not just muscle or a sword, but concrete information. He gave an example. No matter how great the sword you have, if you don't know who your enemy is, how strong they are, or where they came from, you still won't be able to win the fight. The Elf Queen finally spoke up, fully supporting what Hardy said. According to the Queen, It made perfect sense. So, to speed up information gathering, the Elf Queen immediately decided to increase the reward for anyone who could find information about the monsters. But that decision was not liked by one of the elf officials, who immediately left the room with a very irritated expression. And it turned out that the Elf Queen was not just anyone to Hardy, she was his mother. The Elf Queen clearly had a mother's concern. Not just as a ruler, she didn't want to throw Hardy into danger through reckless missions. For her, Hardy was the strongest commander in the Elf Kingdom, and as long as Hardy stood on the front lines, the kingdom's safety could be guaranteed. But despite everything being ready, the confusing factor remained the great tower that stood towering not far from there. The Elf Queen suspected that all this might be related to the return of the Demon King. But Hardy had a different view. Hardy thought it was related to a hero from the human race. Perhaps the long sought-after master had actually awakened and was causing trouble. It turned out that 3 years ago, there had been a potential master who seemed to have extraordinary potential. To be cautious and take no risks, Hardy had killed that potential master. And since then, no potential master from the human race had appeared. Hardy became even more convinced of his stance. According to Hardy, humans were pests whose presence only caused chaos. Meanwhile, on the other side, Light, Nemumu, and Gold had just arrived at a village located not far from the Great Tower. As soon as they arrived, Light greeted the residents there warmly. But the peaceful atmosphere didn't last long, because Gold immediately started teasing Nemumu about her flat chest, making the situation slightly awkward. Suddenly, Light sensed danger approaching, so Light immediately warned Gold and Nemumu not to move carelessly, especially not to draw their hands. Light's danger detection was no joke, and sure enough, a figure of an elf soon approached Light. It turned out the elf was Sasha, a figure from the past who immediately recognized Light even with the mask on. Sasha ordered Light to take off his mask, but Light intensely held back his anger. 3 years without contact, emotional wounds and resentment had piled up, and now Sasha came right away, forcing Light to take off his mask. Nemumu was also getting heated, almost letting slip her desire to slap Sasha's increasingly irritating mouth. But Light still managed to restrain himself. In a cold tone, Light explained that the mask was worn to cover severe burn scars, and no one was allowed to see the face behind it. But Sasha, who was stubborn, went ahead and slapped Light. Without thinking twice, Sasha immediately pulled and forcibly removed the mask. As Light's mask came off, a face that was no longer the same was clearly visible. His face was severely burned, making the shape of his face completely different. The burn scars were not ordinary wounds, but the effect of the SSR Clown Mask card, which had a cognitive illusion ability. So people who saw it would immediately feel that it was genuinely a burn scar, when in fact it was only a visual effect to conceal Light's true identity. Sasha, who initially thought the boy was Light, immediately felt disgusted when she saw the condition of the face. Not long after, Sasha left with an annoyed face, deeply disappointed that she felt she had mistaken the person. Light put his mask back on, then immediately invited Nemumu and Gold to check out the mysterious location called the Great Tower. As they were walking, a random person suddenly approached them and immediately gave a harsh warning. He said not to attempt to go to the Great Tower because the place was full of ferocious monsters that could swallow anyone whole. But as usual, Light ignored it and continued walking casually with his team. Not far from there, 2 elves suddenly appeared and immediately stopped them. It turned out these 2 elves held a grudge because they felt insulted and hurt by Light earlier. They were furious and said they would kill Light on the spot. But Light was very relaxed, saying that if they wanted to fight, then go ahead. He was ready. Then, without further ado, Light immediately ordered Mera to finish off the 2 elves. He even warned that not even a corpse should remain. They were to be devoured until nothing was left. Not long after, a terrifying monster figure appeared from behind the 2 elves. That monster was Mera, Light's summon. Mera moved swiftly and finished off the 2 elves without a trace, truly devouring them completely. After finishing, Light thanked Mera, and Mera replied in a loyal tone, saying that for Light, even 10,000 or 100,000 enemies would be utterly annihilated. Gold, who saw the incident, immediately commented that Mera was indeed reliable, but his form was still terrifying. Namumu also agreed with Gold's opinion, although they also respected Mera's strength. After that, Light's other troops returned one by one. Ice Heat came first, followed by Suzu and Jack. The three of them immediately joined the ranks and were ready to help Light complete the mission they were currently running. Now, Light's four main frontline forces were all gathered, and they were all ready for the big battle. When Ice Heat finally arrived, although a bit late compared to the others. In a humble tone, Ice Heat immediately apologized for being late, but Light, who was calm and mature, responded casually. Light actually appreciated Ice Heat's good intentions and seriousness for coming, even if late. Not long after that, Jack appeared and greeted Light politely, in a style typical of a respectful knight. But after that, Jack immediately turned to Gold and shouted, asking in a high tone if Gold had really guarded his master, Light. What shocked everyone was not the question, but the intense killing aura emanating from Jack. Jack explained that he didn't mean to release a killing intent aura in front of Light, but it was a form of strict warning for all his juniors. It was also his firm stance as an elder brother. But Light didn't stand still. He immediately reminded Jack not to carelessly provoke a tense atmosphere and not to be provocative. After the atmosphere cooled down again, Light complimented the cool gauntlet attire Ice Heat was wearing. He said that Ice Heat usually only wore the Naraku servant uniform when working in the Abyss, but now he looked different. While they were talking about it, Mera mischievously chimed in, telling Ice Heat to just go without clothes, to be completely naked. A typical friendly banter that always causes friction. But Light didn't just focus on them. His gaze briefly went to Suzu as well. Light observed Suzu, who had the gunner skill, skilled at shooting like a sniper. Light thought that Suzu's card was written with a skill called androgyny, but until now, Light hadn't found its exact meaning. After that, they finally arrived near the Great Tower. As soon as they arrived, they were immediately greeted by three powerful women who had been waiting from above. Ellie, Nazuna, and Aoyuki, who leaped down with a cool style. Light looked very happy when he greeted the three of them, and immediately invited everyone to enter the tower because there was something important to discuss. As they entered and ascended, Light briefly saw the silhouette of a two-headed dragon that startled Light somewhat. But it turned out to be Ellie's pet, and without further ado, they immediately went to the top floor of the tower. Light sat on the prepared throne, then Ellie began to explain the grand plan that had been compiled. Ellie said their first goal was to marry Sasha into the royal family, so they could leverage Sasha's death to raise Light's adventurer rank. This plan was not just about revenge, but also a somewhat cruel but effective political strategy. The second goal was to use the strength of the White Knights group from the Elf Kingdom. That would be a test to gauge the capabilities of Light's soldiers. Even though their levels were very high, their real fighting ability had never been tested in a real battlefield. The third, once the White Knights group was defeated and captured, they could gain important information about the Master. And from there, they could proceed to pressure the Elf Kingdom, even forcing them to submit and become Light's subordinates in order to bring down one of their target nations. Ellie concluded her long plan by saying that this great tower was also used as the main testing ground for all elves. So this place was perfect to be made the main base for their large movement. Light himself looked satisfied and very happy with the plan, Ellie explained, because it was truly detailed and mature. As a precaution, Ellie had also prepared her pet on the first floor to guard the surrounding area and ensure safety. Meanwhile, in another place, Sasha was in a complete panic upon seeing a large dragon emerge from inside the tower. Sasha was immediately terrified and confused about what to do. The report about the appearance of the red dragon immediately reached the elf royal castle. The queen immediately panicked because the information about the dragon came from two valid sources. The Prime Minister explained that the first report came from an adventurer named the Black Clown who was exploring the dungeon with a dwarf, while the second report came from a hired elf adventurer. Both gave information about the Red Dragon, and its validity was confirmed. Hardy, who was known to be confident, immediately stood up and said with certainty that the White Knights group would definitely be able to defeat the Red Dragon. Back inside the tower, Light had begun organizing his best forces. His core trio was prepared. Ellie the Contradiction Mage at level 9,999. Aoyuki the Monster Tamer, also at level 9,999. And Nazuna the Vampire Knight, also at level 9,999. These were the three main spearheads. Then there was the second layer, whose members were also no joke. There was Suzu the Sniper at level 7,777, Mara the Chimera at level 7,777, Jack the Steel Bloodwall, also at level 7,777, and Ice Heat the Icefire Grappler, who also had a level of 7,777. They were all ready for war, ready to test how strong the elf forces, who had been boasting all this time, really were. In the other corner of the dark and cold forest, the White Knights' troops were all gathered. Their leader, Hardy, stood at the very front, overseeing the increasingly neat formation. Sasha also joined the ranks. Sasha's face looked very serious. Her determination to confront Light was fixed. There was not the slightest doubt, as Sasha felt her forces were now far more prepared and stronger than before. Sasha had also inwardly promised that this mission would not trouble any other forces, especially Michael and the Elf Nation, who had always helped her. Amidst the escalating preparations, the two twin kids, Nia and Kia, were busy gossiping in the back. Instead of being tense, they were preoccupied discussing strategy and the White Knights' battle formation, as if debating an evening meal menu. Hardy glanced at Sasha, then said he needed her help to ensure the mission ran smoothly. Michael was equally confident. His face showed full belief that this time they would achieve great success. The White Knights troops finally moved and started approaching the Great Tower, the place rumored to be Light's headquarters now. But as soon as they got close, they were immediately greeted by strange creatures. Two of Ellie's pet monsters emerged. Their forms were terrifying, like wolves, but with snake tails. And there weren't just one, but three of them. Sasha briefly gave information to Hardy, saying those monsters were likely above level 1000. But it turned out Sasha also explained that the original number was 6 of them. Only 3 were visible at first. Hardy immediately took a stance. He didn't want to be reckless, knowing their main goal wasn't to fight those monsters. The real target was the Red Dragon rumored to be inside the Great Tower. So they couldn't waste energy. Suddenly, a massive flash of light appeared in the sky. That was the signal that the battle had begun. The explosion also successfully drew the attention of all the surrounding monsters upwards. Their focus was diverted, and that became the golden opportunity to sneak into the tower. Hardy immediately ordered everyone to advance, but before they moved, Hardy cast a silent spell. In an instant, all the troops became completely silent. Not even the sound of footsteps could be heard. The goal was to avoid detection while infiltrating. As they entered the tower, the atmosphere immediately turned very tense. Sharfat, one of them, immediately went ahead to clear the path. But before he could do anything, all the troops were suddenly caught by a teleportation magic trap. One by one, they vanished, scattered across different floors. Once the teleportation was complete, all the White Knights members were dispersed to different floors that were already guarded by Light's elite forces. There was no turning back. The revenge drama had finally begun. Group battles exploded in every corner of the tower. Meanwhile, Light sat casually on his throne. Light's face was completely carefree, instead grinning mockingly at the forces who had once abandoned him. From up there, Light watched all of them as if watching dolls about to fall one by one. He was perfectly relaxed, as if he already knew the ending of this game. Nia and Kia were strongly protesting to Sharfat. They felt Sharfat was too reckless and careless, to the point of not noticing the magic trap that got them stuck. But before they could protest further, Nia and Kia had to face a harsh reality. Standing before them now were Ice Heat and Mera, who turned out to be their opponents. Mera immediately mocked them without hesitation. He said frightened faces like that weren't suitable right now. But Mera also said they were somewhat lucky, because according to Ellie's orders, they were not to be killed. Hearing Ellie's name, Nia and Kia became even more curious. They began to guess. Could the Red Dragon's real name be Ellie? But Mera answered calmly that Ellie was indeed intentionally used as bait to attract the attention of their main target, the White Knights group. Ice Heat immediately scolded Mera for being too talkative, giving important information to the enemy without thinking. But after that, Ice Heat said he would fight Nia and Kia with full power. According to Ice Heat, it was a form of respect for lowly creatures like them. Nia and Kia were immediately enraged. Being called lowly seemed to cross the line. Without thinking twice, the two of them immediately attacked. But unfortunately, Ice Heat and Mera dodged the attack as if it were light exercise. Nia and Kia wouldn't give up. They boasted about their new strength. Nia said they were now united with the Master's blood, and their level had broken the 1,800 mark. Nia also said that Light's forces were fools for underestimating their abilities. Meanwhile, Kia continuously attacked Mera as if endlessly. The fight between the four of them grew hotter, more brutal, and more exciting. Mera remained relaxed and continued to provoke. He said, "Don't just talk. You elf brats should show something real." On the other side, Sharfat was alone. He was heavily regretting his failure to read the teleportation trap magic. That mistake caused him to be separated from Nia and Kia. But his bad luck wasn't over, because he was now being blocked by a mysterious sniper named Suzu. Instead of being cautious, Sharfat immediately tried to introduce himself. He said Suzu was very cute, but Suzu remained silent, giving no reaction. Suddenly, the weapon Suzu was carrying spoke on its own. It said, "Sorry, my partner Suzu is a quiet person." Sharfat was immediately shocked because the weapon could talk. The weapon introduced itself as Rock, and his partner was Suzu. Sharfat grew even more irritated because he had to fight a cute girl like Suzu, even though in his heart he was madly in love. But Suzu was startled and afraid because, according to her, Sharfat was not her type. Sharfat even asked innocently what he had to be like to be Suzu's type. Rock calmly answered, saying Suzu's ideal type had black hair, a cute and cool face, was kind to everyone, and had high dignity, which clearly pointed to one name, Light. Suzu immediately got angry and swung Rock because he was talking too much. Not long after, Sharfat initiated the attack. His attack used invisible arrows. But Suzu looked very relaxed. With a fluid leap, Suzu avoided the attack as if it were effortless. Then Suzu fired back with her rifle, aiming directly at Sharfat. Sharfat also didn't stand still, immediately attacking back with arrows. Rock suddenly commented, saying Sharfat was actually quite good, not entirely useless. And finally, the fight between the sniper and the archer continued, growing hotter and more exciting. The intense fight broke out again in the arena between Mera and Ice Heat against the two small elves, Nia and Kia. In the beginning, Mera was still very relaxed, even briefly mocking Nia and Kia for their constant jumping around like hyperactive kids who couldn't sit still. But Nia and Kia didn't stand idly by. They immediately released the Wind Cutter skill toward Mera and Ice Heat. Although briefly surprised that the two kids could cast magic while running, Mera and Ice Heat still dodged casually as if there were no serious threat. Suddenly, Nia and Kia launched Wind Cutters from all directions. From behind, from the side, the air was completely filled with sharp wind slices. But the result was nil. Mera and Ice Heat avoided them too easily, like dancing in a shower of leaves. Kia immediately took the initiative, throwing a dagger at Mera, and the dagger successfully hit Mera's leg. Nia immediately followed up, advancing with her sword and successfully cutting off Mera's right arm. That moment made Nia and Kia ecstatic, laughing with satisfaction because they felt they had successfully wounded the enemy. But unfortunately, that feeling of satisfaction didn't last long. Mera instead laughed loudly, considering the incident just a clown show at a night market. He even played with the arm that had just been cut off. Ice Heat stood by, looking increasingly disappointed. According to Ice Heat, their opponents were too weak for an experiment. The emotional Kia immediately snapped back, saying she had just successfully cut off Mera's arm. But Mera was relaxed, laughing again, telling Kia to look at Nia's sword. The sword was clean, without a single drop of blood, so it was clear the wound they thought was fatal was actually just a trick. To add to the drama, Mera did something even more absurd. He ate his own severed arm, and not long after, it grew back as if nothing had happened. Not stopping there, Mera even pulled off his own head without feeling any pain, as if the head were just a hat he could remove when it was hot. Mera finally introduced himself as Mera the Chimera with the absurd level of 7,777 and his friend Ice Heat as the grappler from Hot Fire Freezing with the same level. Mera's explanation was mind-blowing, because it turned out his body was formed from multiple organisms, and every cell in his body was a living organism itself. So no matter how much he was cut, his body would remain perfectly fine. Nia and Kia were half dead with shock. Level 7,777 was insane, even more than double the level of Hardy, the leader of the White Knights. They couldn't believe it and accused Mera of just talking big. But since they had no other choice, Nia and Kia immediately released the Windcutter skill again to attack. The frustrating part was that Mera and Ice Heat didn't dodge. They deliberately took the attack and still stood with bored faces because they felt nothing. The attack continued. Nia and Kia took turns spamming Windcutter and Thunder Arrow, but the result was still 0. No damage was inflicted at all. Desperate, Nia tried to attack at close range with her sword, but Mera just grinned, dismissing the attack as useless. Ice Heat grew more annoyed, feeling their enemy was just a weak kid unworthy of being an experimental opponent. Ice Heat even began to doubt if this was the correct target for their project. Fear grew immense on Nia and Kia's faces, and they finally decided to flee. But Mera immediately said it was useless because all the doors were tightly locked. There would be absolutely no escape. With the atmosphere growing hotter, Mera transformed his right hand into a weapon ready to crush anything, while Ice Heat pulled out his favorite gauntlet named Ifrit. Both were ready to continue the serious fight. Nia ran, panting, her breath ragged, panicked because she felt she had to report what she had just seen quickly. The problem was, there were two beings whose power was far more insane than a dragon. Kia, who was running with her, immediately thought hard. At least, they still had one advantage they could exploit: speed. So, without thinking twice, Kia continued to run with Nia, hoping to escape the chaotic situation. But in the middle of their escape, Kia suddenly felt something was wrong. Sweat started pouring, more than just from running exhaustion. The surrounding atmosphere changed, becoming hotter as if standing near a volcanic crater. Not long after, a wave of heat as fierce as magma surged towards Nia and Kia. Instinctively, they immediately cast a defensive spell, Ice Wall. A massive wall of ice appeared to hold back the wave. Unfortunately, the ice wall only lasted for a moment. The heat was too brutal. The wall immediately melted, dissolving like wax. They hurriedly cast Ice Wall again, trying to hold on while enduring the fear. But the result was the same. The second Ice Wall also melted instantly, this time even faster than before. Nia and Kia started to panic, realizing they were fighting no ordinary beings. It turned out the source of the extreme heat came from the gauntlet Ice Heat War, which grew even more ablaze after Ifrit was released. The attack was no joke. It was truly hell in real life. Nia and Kia screamed in pain, their skin starting to feel burned, their breathing grew heavy, and they could only regret fighting Ice Heat and Mera, the duo whose power was nonsensical. But even though their bodies were nearly burned up, they didn't give up. They continuously cast Ice Wall, one after another, trying to survive even though the results were still nil. The ice walls they created kept melting as if meaningless. But they still forced themselves to stand, still trying. Until finally, Ice Heat walked closer with an increasingly brutal heat aura. Nothing could withstand the heat. Instantly, Nia and Kia were incinerated. Their bodies were severely charred. But strangely, they didn't die. It turned out it was all thanks to the magic effect of Ellie's tower that was still clinging to their bodies. If not for the tower's protection, Mera was sure Nia and Kia would be nothing but ash. Ice Heat watched all of it while grumbling. His opponents were too weak, to the point of frustrating himself. His desire to have fun through an exciting fight ended up being a letdown because the opponents he was given were mismatched. Meanwhile, Mera began to step closer to Nia and Kia, who were still scorched and whimpering for help. But Mera had no compassion. Coldly, Mera said he would make them fully submit to Master Light. Without hesitation, Mera lifted Nia and Kia's helpless bodies, then began to torture them with his chimera snakes. The pain grew more brutal, and Mera could only laugh with satisfaction watching their suffering. On the second floor of the tower, the atmosphere intensified. Sharfat continued his aggression against Suzu, but Suzu remained calm, her movements relaxed, and her gaze sharp as if observing something important. There was no panic at all, even though Sharfat continuously attacked using extremely dangerous invisible arrows. But every time Sharfat shot, Suzu was always able to dodge. Although one arrow almost grazed her, Suzu still survived, completely untouched. Rock watched from a distance, fully focused on analyzing every one of Sharfat's movements. Sharfat's attack patterns were indeed constantly changing, impossible to easily predict. But Rock knew well that the longer it went on, the more the openings would show. Meanwhile, Sharfat grew more emotional, immediately shooting several more arrows towards Suzu. But Suzu still kept dodging, not once attacking back. Sharfat was starting to get annoyed, then mocked Suzu for only dodging all this time. Sharfat grew more serious, this time firing invisible arrows that closed off all escape routes, as if Suzu had nowhere left to run. But, as expected, Suzu still managed to escape with nonsensical nonchalance. Sharfat didn't give up, immediately casting a final attack, a rain of hundreds of arrows spreading from all directions. A massive explosion occurred, making the entire floor tremble. Sharfat briefly smiled contentedly, thinking Suzu must have fallen. But as the smoke cleared, Sharfat was utterly shocked. Suzu was still standing tall, without a single scratch. Sharfat started to flirt, saying he would prefer it if Suzu just surrendered. He claimed Sharfat could become the equal of Master Light, so he could earn Suzu's love and make Suzu forget Light. Those words made Suzu truly furious. Without hesitation, Suzu said Sharfat had just signed the contract for his own grave. Suzu's killing aura immediately exploded violently, so intense that it made the initially overconfident Sharfat turn pale. Even Rock, who had only been observing, also trembled slightly at the sight of that aura. Without further ado, Suzu immediately raised her weapon. The sound of her shot echoed, and the increasingly maniacal killing aura made the atmosphere of the room feel like it was about to explode. Sharfat couldn't hide his fear, because it was clear. This battle was only truly beginning. The name is Suzu, a fighter who has a very unique weapon named Rock. But don't misunderstand, this isn't a stone. Rock is a kind of magic musket. But the insane part is that this weapon can fire as many magic bullets as desired without running out. You could say the bullets are unlimited. It was truly a perfect weapon for an enraged person like Suzu, who was completely furious at Sharfat. When she could no longer hold back her emotion, Suzu immediately fired bullets from Rock. No joke, over 1,000 bullets were released in just 1 minute. It was like a meteor shower, and all the bullets were targeting one person, Sharfat. Sharfat immediately panicked, running frantically as if chased by death. He tried to use his ultimate move called Semidaire, using a crossbow with maximum level magic. But still, the speed and quantity of Suzu's magic bullets could not be matched at all. One bullet successfully hit Sharfat's left side. Sharfat immediately stumbled while running, because the bullet turned out to be poisoned. Before he could think of anything, Suzu appeared in front of Sharfat with a casual look, her musket ready to fire. Without hesitation, a bullet was aimed straight at Sharfat's head. It wasn't just an ordinary bullet, but a curse bullet, a confusion bullet, a blinding bullet. All of them hit the target perfectly. Sharfat immediately collapsed, afflicted by many effects, and was now severely dying. Rock, who accompanied Suzu, could only sigh. Fortunately, Ellie's technology kept Sharfat alive, even though his body had been the target of thousands of curse bullets from Suzu. But for Suzu, when she was enraged, shooting wasn't enough. Suzu immediately stomped on Sharfat's head, continuing to vent her anger, completely satisfied, as if repaying all the long-held resentment. But Rock hurriedly reminded Suzu to stop, because if Sharfat actually died, Light's mission to gain information could completely fail. Besides that, Rock also mentioned something that made Suzu immediately panic. He said the bottom of Suzu's skirt was showing. Suzu was immediately embarrassed and stopped stomping on Sharfat's head. After realizing she had gone too far, Suzu tried to heal Sharfat, afraid Sharfat would actually die. But Rock said that the problem wasn't actually Sharfat's body, but Sharfat's mentality was completely destroyed during the fight. He couldn't think, couldn't talk. He was like an empty doll whose soul had departed. Rock finally tried to calm down the panicking Suzu, while saying that fortunately, Master Light was a kind person. So, it was highly likely Light would forgive Suzu, even though the fight was overly brutal. On another floor of the dungeon, which was clearly different from before, the atmosphere suddenly changed when Mast appeared, and it turned out Jack had been waiting from the start. Jack immediately introduced himself without formality, saying his full name was Jack the ultra-rare Iron-Blooded Iron Wall, and his level was no joke, reaching the figure 7,777. Mast, who was seeing Jack for the first time, immediately felt it was nonsense. According to Mast, it was impossible for a human to have such an insane level. But Jack remained calm and instead said that as a true man, before fighting, one must introduce oneself properly. Jack also said that even though their levels were very far apart, Jack wouldn't oppress the weaker or look for trouble. He even offered that if Mast surrendered now, Jack would forgive him and wouldn't hurt him at all. But Mast stubbornly refused to believe it. Level 7,777 was like a god to Mast. It made no sense for a human. Jack was relaxed, suggesting he use an appraisal skill to see Jack's status himself. But Jack also acknowledged that Mast probably didn't have that skill, so he couldn't check directly. Without further ado, Mast immediately drew his weapon and pushed forward, wanting to immediately prove all of Jack's words. As he charged, Jack was neither surprised nor desperately holding back. He was very casual, merely parrying the attack and saying his movement was too slow. Mast was immediately thrown back by the slap and was stunned. Not giving up, Mast immediately attacked again, but the result was the same. Jack blocked every attack as if swatting flies. Feeling he couldn't continue like this, Mast immediately unleashed his full power. That power was even equivalent to Hardy's, which was clearly above the normal human average. But when used to attack Jack, the result was still the same. Jack still parried the attack with one hand and sent Mast flying even worse than before. Mast, who was starting to get scared, finally realized that the level difference between them was nonsensical. But Mast didn't surrender. Mast remained determined and said that as a white knight of the Elf Kingdom, Mast had a responsibility to protect many people. So there was no way Mast would just give up. But Jack gave unexpected information. Jack said that all this time, the elves had been slaughtering many humans. Jack even concluded that all the elves seemed to be fools. Mast grew even angrier, immediately continuing his attack while raising his trusted halberd staff. The staff was immediately commanded to devour his soul and give him full power. Instantly, a massive wave of power surged from Mast's body, as if breaking all limits. Seeing that, Jack no longer stood still. Jack also started to get serious. His right hand transformed. Red muscles began to appear, and it was clear Jack had prepared himself to destroy everything in front of him. Now, Mast was playing for keeps. To fight Jack, who had an insane level, Mast immediately used the Uprising Halberd, a weapon that could increase its owner's strength by up to 3 times. As the weapon's effect activated, Mast's aura changed drastically. His body became tense, his muscles bulged everywhere, and even his eyes bled from the intense power surging into his body. He was like a war machine, ready to strike down anything in sight. Seeing that change, Jack became even more excited. Watching Mast transform into something more brutal motivated Jack even further. Jack felt it was time to get serious too. Without much thought, Jack immediately took off his clothes, ready to fight without holding anything back. Mast immediately charged forward, wielding the Uprising Halberd with maximum force. His attack was truly intended to cleave Jack, but when the blow reached Jack, something nonsensical happened. Jack held back the Uprising Halberd's attack with only one hand, and even more insanely, the tip of the halberd immediately cracked upon hitting Jack's hand. Not stopping there, Jack immediately activated the Iron Arm mode. Instantly, Jack's entire body transformed into a full-body, iron-blooded form, its color a deep red and its shape truly terrifying, like armored monster. Jack, who was now in serious mode, challenged Mast again, wanting to fight directly without holding back even slightly. Mast remained undaunted. With the remaining energy he had, Mast immediately raised his halberd and launched another attack that was far stronger than before. But the result was even worse. As the weapon touched Jack's body, the halberd was totally destroyed. Mast stared in disbelief that such a powerful weapon could be instantly crushed. Jack was relaxed seeing all of it. Jack said the previous attack was quite good, but still not enough to defeat Jack. Jack also briefly teased Mast, saying that, unfortunately, Mast was having the worst luck ever because he met the worst possible opponent. Without waiting long, Jack immediately hammered Mast relentlessly. Jack's punches came out continuously, without mercy, similar to the attack style of Giorgio from the anime JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Mast didn't have time to fight back. His body was beaten severely until his blood splattered everywhere. Mast's body was like a rag doll thrown against a wall. After the satisfying beating, Jack finally felt he had gone a bit overboard, but fortunately, the magic effect from Ellie's tower kept Mast from dying on the spot. Jack immediately said, "If you knew from the start you couldn't win, why did you still insist on fighting?" Jack considered Mast thinking too naive and simple for a battlefield this harsh. Finally, Jack dragged the dying Mast, whose body was covered in wounds and blood, out of the place. Meanwhile, the atmosphere shifted. On the 4th floor, Hardy had already arrived, but Hardy wasn't alone. On that floor, someone was waiting. The mysterious figure immediately introduced herself as Nazuna, and Nazuna said she was the strongest subordinate of Master Light. As he stepped onto the deepest floor of this giant tower, Hardy immediately felt the atmosphere was vastly different from the 1st floor. The air here was heavier, and the magical aura felt denser. Hardy began to think this place might indeed be the deepest and most important part of the entire tower. But just as he started thinking, Nazuna already looked annoyed because her introduction was completely ignored. Nazuna explained that Hardy was known as the strongest of the elf race, which is why Master Light gave a direct order to Nazuna to personally test Hardy's strength. Hardy immediately put the pieces together. So, the reason why all the White Knights were separated was also because of Master Light's orders. Everything was planned from the start. Nothing was a coincidence. Glancing at Nazuna up close, Hardy briefly thought Nazuna was just an ordinary girl. But what made Hardy cautious was that Nazuna's strength was completely unpredictable. Even so, Hardy remained confident. According to Hardy, no matter how strong Nazuna was, she still wouldn't be able to defeat Hardy. He had faced too many tough opponents, so now was not the time for doubts. Nazuna saw Hardy standing still and not moving, and immediately said she had been longing to enjoy this fight. But just as she prepared herself, Hardy was utterly shocked. Nazuna could casually lift a supersized sword, as if it weighed nothing. From that, Hardy began to suspect Nazuna might be a Majin race with nonsensical physical strength. Because Hardy was still stunned, Nazuna immediately took the initiative and moved first. A single slash came out, and the result was truly beyond reason. Hardy's sword was instantly split in half before he could do anything, and the attack even managed to breach the great wall of the tower. Nazuna's power was completely beyond expectation. Absolutely brutal. But it was Nazuna who was stunned. She was shocked that Hardy was defeated so easily when her expectation was an exciting duel. Nazuna was more concerned about the tower wall that now had a huge hole because of the attack. Ellie immediately appeared with a furious look. Ellie was angry because repairing a tower like that required immense magic from Ellie herself to cover the damage. Meanwhile, Hardy, who was just moments ago so confident, was now lying helpless. Ellie immediately mocked Nazuna, saying Nazuna should have restrained herself a little when attacking. Nazuna immediately apologized and promised to be more careful. Ellie became calmer, happy that Nazuna understood the situation. But it turned out that the seemingly dying Hardy could still raise one hand and activate an intermediate heal spell to mend the severe wounds on his body. Nazuna, seeing this, was immediately happy, because it turned out Hardy hadn't died instantly. Nazuna chuckled, because the magic effect from Ellie's tower meant Hardy wouldn't be able to die on the spot immediately. This time, Nazuna would attack again, but to avoid a repeat of the last incident, Nazuna decided to use only a small fraction of her strength, just to avoid any more breach walls or white knights falling in a single attack. After the previous incident, Hardy began to realize he looked too pathetic. The absolute defeat in just one attack felt like his dignity as an elf knight had completely crumbled. Amidst that shame, Hardy admitted he had underestimated Nazuna too much. And this time, he promised to unleash his full power. As soon as he said that, Hardy immediately activated a skill he had saved as a trump card. The skill's name was Silent. Without much movement, a large sphere suddenly appeared around him. In an instant, the entire combat area was covered in a silent mist that drastically changed the atmosphere. The effect of Silent was immediately felt, and slowly began to chip away at Nazuna's mind, making her thoughts feel dragged into a dark, utterly silent mist. The Silent skill had two main effects. The first was a gradual debuff effect, so Nazuna's abilities would slowly decrease over time as long as she remained in the silent area. Then, there was also a status reduction effect for opponents, directly acknowledged as enemies by Hardy, and this occurred through the power of silence. But the crazier part was the second effect of this skill, a secret effect only known to Hardy and his mother. That effect was known as Silent Reverse, an ability that could increase Hardy's status by absorbing the status reduction effects from the enemy and using them as an additional power stock for Hardy himself. With all those preparations, Hardy had also drawn an invisible sword called Hermit. This sword was completely undetectable by anyone except Hardy himself. So from the outside, Hardy looked like he wasn't carrying a weapon, when in fact he was holding his most trusted secret weapon. Meanwhile, Nazuna became even more excited because her opponent now looked much more serious and powerful. But Nazuna also remembered the previous incident when the tower wall breached, so now she had to be more careful and restrain her power to prevent it from happening again. But on the other side, Hardy misunderstood. Hardy thought Nazuna looked more cautious now because she had realized the strategy and power he had just unleashed. So Hardy focused more, his eyes never leaving Nazuna's movements, observing all possible movements. With all the preparations from the Silent skill and the Hermit sword, Hardy felt he was now much stronger and fully ready to fight anyone. But before he could think further, Nazuna suddenly lunged forward and attacked directly. In an instant, Nazuna's body appeared in front of Hardy as fast as lightning. There was no strange movement, just one ordinary punch. But the effect was immediately brutal. Hardy was sent flying, blood spurting heavily from his mouth and body. Even though the wall where they were fighting this time didn't breach like before, a large crack still appeared on the wall. Hardy fell to the ground, his body covered in severe wounds, unable to move much. Meanwhile, Nazuna instead shouted, "Hooray!" while jumping lightly because this time she managed to restrain her attack and didn't breach the tower wall like before. But the happiness didn't last long. Nazuna was immediately shocked when she saw Ellie appear again with an annoyed expression. Nazuna was confused and said she hadn't destroyed the wall this time, so she shouldn't be scolded. But Ellie immediately re-explained that what she meant by not damaging the wall was not only not breaching it, but also included not making large cracks, like the one just now. Because even those cracks were enough to drain Ellie's magic, which was used for the tower wall's automatic repair. Hearing that, Nazuna immediately cried dramatically and asked Master Light for support. Nazuna whined, calling Ellie her mother-in-law and asking not to be scolded constantly. But instead of softening Ellie, the address made Ellie even angrier, perhaps from a mix of annoyance and disgust. Meanwhile, on the other side, the wall where the fight took place slowly began to show an automatic repair process thanks to Ellie's magic. The cracks started closing by themselves, but amidst all that chaos, the still dying Hardy fell from his position, clinging to the wall, and immediately slumped to the floor. This battle was not over, but it was clear who was in control. In the magnificent highest floor of the giant tower, the atmosphere was initially quite calm. Ellie, who usually goes all out in a fight until her last drop of blood, this time looked very relaxed. Light briefly commented on it, saying it was lucky Ellie had auto-recovery, so he didn't have to bother healing wounds manually. Although Ellie had just complained earlier, her expression now looked very happy. Light started discussing the recent fight between Nazuna and Hardy. According to Light, their duel was far from expectations. Hardy, who was supposedly the strongest elf, was too easily defeated. Initially, Light had hoped for an exciting duel. But it turned out that for Nazuna, who was already at level 4,000-ish, Hardy was just like a passing breeze. Too easy to fight. Ellie also chimed in, saying the previous incident shouldn't have required Nazuna's intervention. According to Ellie, Nazuna was indeed very strong, but that might be due to her own unique identity. Ellie briefly gave a subtle hint, saying that many thought they were all being spoiled by Light as their master, but in reality, each of them still had to continue to develop. They couldn't just rely on their current strength. Light nodded, and also thought that Nazuna did have an advantage in terms of defense, and her status was indeed very high. But Nazuna wasn't the only strong one. The other characters in this group also had great potential. That's why in cases like this, Light didn't want to intervene directly. If Light himself got involved, he was afraid the fight would become overkill and prevent the others from developing. Even though the four sisters, Nazuna, Ellie, Aoyuki, and Mei, often argue among themselves, many lessons can be learned from those interactions. Light suddenly stood up and said they finally had a visitor. Light immediately put his mask back on, and in a serious tone told everyone to focus more this time. The guests who arrived were not ordinary people. On the other side, Sasha and Michael looked disoriented from the teleportation effect they had just experienced. Michael briefly thought they were likely quite far from the starting point now. Michael immediately took the initiative to go in front, while Sasha was told to guard the rear while preparing her magic item. Michael briefly warned her to remain vigilant because this place was not ordinary. As they entered the large room with a very majestic door, the atmosphere immediately changed. Inside, Light was already sitting on his throne. In a casual but firm tone, Light immediately greeted Sasha and said, "Long time no see." Sasha, hearing that, was immediately shocked and instinctively backed away. Michael grew suspicious and immediately asked, "Do you know the being sitting on that throne, Sasha?" Sasha said that early on, when the giant tower was discovered, Sasha had met the masked figure. And from the tone of voice that just came out, Sasha immediately knew. But more than just knowing him, Sasha immediately started rambling, talking about the past, and saying that their previous meeting made Sasha disgusted. That feeling of revulsion was still lingering now. Light chuckled, saying they were once in the same party and were very close, but now Sasha had become so fierce. As Light took off his mask and revealed his face, Sasha was even more shocked. The face that appeared was not an unfamiliar one. It was the face she had once known, a face that held a long history in Sasha's life. Light spoke one more time, saying, "Long time no see," but this time without a mask. After that, Light immediately said that his arrival now was not just for a reunion, but to avenge the betrayal of 3 years ago. Right before Sasha's eyes, the figure she had presumed dead suddenly appeared and stood calmly. That figure was Light. Sasha was utterly shocked, her mind a mess, because she never expected Light to be alive. 3 years had passed, but Light's appearance hadn't changed at all. Sasha was extremely confused, feeling strange why there was no growth from Light during all that time. Light calmly explained that his body's condition had stopped developing due to the effect of a certain skill, and that was precisely what kept Light remembering the unresolved revenge for these 3 years. Nothing had changed about his intention to avenge everything. Michael, who had been standing beside Sasha, started to get curious. Michael asked who Light really was, because from the short conversation, it was very clear that the relationship between Sasha and Light was more than just a casual acquaintance. Light plainly explained everything. 3 years ago, Light was almost killed in the abyss. But good fortune still sided with Light because he was thrown out by a teleportation spell. Since then, Light had plotted revenge against Sasha and all the former party members he had once traveled with. Light said that now he had gathered an entire army, and this giant tower was specially created to welcome Sasha. All of this was designed from the start to be the perfect stage for the most satisfying revenge. Sasha's face began to change. Fear started to show, and the atmosphere grew tense. But on the other side, Michael laughed happily. Michael praised Sasha for being considered a goddess of fortune. According to Michael, this was a great opportunity because he could meet the former master candidate who was still alive. Michael boasted, saying he would kill Light, and one day his child would become the first queen candidate. Michael looked very confident. He felt lucky because he brought a special item from the royal family. With that item in hand, Michael was even more certain he wouldn't lose. Sasha, who was initially shocked, now yelled back with a high voice. Sasha insisted, saying she wouldn't forgive Light this time, and now was the time to truly kill Light. But Light remained calm, with no exaggerated reaction, and didn't even respond to Sasha's and Michael's loud ranting. Without further ado, Light stepped down from his throne, carrying his staff. Light immediately told Aoyuki and Ellie not to interfere. As he reached Sasha and Michael, Light immediately announced that the time had come to begin the revenge. Sasha continued to ramble. No matter how strong Light was now, Sasha claimed she was far stronger because she had been specially trained. Sasha's level had even reached 500. As proof, Sasha pulled out a magical shell weapon that turned out to be a Phantasm-class royal treasure. Instantly, an angel summon named Ocarina appeared. Sasha confidently said that Ocarina would kill Light like swatting an insect. Ocarina immediately advanced and attacked Light without hesitation. Light remained relaxed, viewing the attack as no threat. Calmly, Light dodged and immediately retaliated with magic. Light's attack hit the target and immediately pierced Ocarina's defense. The angel's shield immediately shattered and turned to ashes. It wasn't over yet. 2 additional angels suddenly appeared. One was a physical attack type, one was a night type, and the other was a mage type shaped like a statue. But instead of panicking, Light just grinned casually at the angel party, which Light considered underwhelming. Sasha was even more shocked. She never expected Light to be able to counter the attack of 3 angels simultaneously. What was initially thought to be an easy retribution turned into a far heavier battle than imagined. In the middle of the intensifying battle, Michael was suddenly utterly shocked because he never expected a human could destroy an angel's defense wall with just one blow. Michael stared blankly because this was clearly beyond reason. Meanwhile, Sasha was still smug, assuming Light was still level 15, like 3 years ago. But Light immediately informed her, calmly, that he was now level 9,999. Sasha was instantly shocked, like seeing a ghost in broad daylight. But Michael quickly chimed in, telling Sasha not to be fooled. Michael was certain it was just a bluff, because it was absolutely impossible for anyone's level to be 3 times that of the elf leader. Michael grew more confident and kept telling Sasha that Light was just making things up. Sasha, who for some reason believed Michael's words more than the reality before her eyes, immediately ordered the three angels to attack Light. But Light remained calm and proved that level 9,999 was not just a number. Light immediately unleashed the skill Dust Breath, and before anyone could think, he immediately followed it up with the skill Shadow Dance. Sasha was stunned, never expecting Light to cast magic without incantation, let alone two skills simultaneously. And before she could breathe a sigh of relief, Light continued with the skill Fire Shield, then unleashed the skill Ice Sword. The effect was absolutely brutal. The mage-type angel immediately fell, and Sasha and Michael became even more disbelieving of what they were seeing. But Light was also surprised. It turned out the fallen angel could be revived. Sasha immediately explained proudly that she could summon the angels repeatedly as long as she still had the magical shell. Light didn't waste time, immediately advancing towards Sasha to destroy the shell, but Michael immediately stepped in to protect his fiancée. Michael stood in front of Sasha, then said that Light was unworthy of touching his fiancée with his dirty hands. Light was thrown back, but fortunately, he was still perfectly fine, completely unharmed. He was just confused how he could be thrown back when he felt he hadn't touched anything. Michael finally revealed that the shield he was using could automatically reflect all enemy attacks. The shield's name was also no joke, a Phantasm-class item called Blessing and Punishment. Michael also explained that the shield could significantly increase the user's status during combat. Sasha grew more cynical and said that the angels would continue to attack Light non-stop until Sasha herself said stop. And for defense, Michael would handle everything. Sasha immediately laughed loudly, feeling she had won outright, and Light had no hope of escaping. Sasha started rambling, calling Light trash, a sardine, even calling Light a cursed land snail. Michael also added, saying Light didn't understand the feeling of being defeated before the fight even started, and now Light had entered the stage of despair. But Light's reaction was completely unexpected. Light only laughed casually, as if watching a cheap comedy act. Light thanked Sasha and Michael for providing entertainment so far, but now was enough, and it was time for Light to get serious. Ellie and Aoyuki, seeing Light's expression, immediately panicked. They realized something was wrong. And sure enough, Light immediately released the first soul-sealing code 9999. In an instant, the entire arena was filled with giant magic circles that emerged from the ground, walls, and even the air. Light stood in the center, with an aura that was no joke, and then unleashed his ultimate magic, Extra Shinso Gungnir, in the middle of the arena, which was beginning to crack under the pressure of the intensifying magic. A jet-black divine spear finally appeared, enveloped in an aura of malevolence that made the surrounding air heavy and suffocating. The spear was no ordinary weapon. Its energy felt dark and wild, like something that shouldn't exist in this world. Ellie and Mei immediately scrambled to analyze the newly appeared weapon, but even after deploying all their high-level magic analysis capabilities, not a single piece of information could be obtained. The spear, called Shinso Gungnir, was completely unanalyzable, as if its power was too immense for ordinary beings to comprehend. The spear was so dangerous that it once required 5 people to seal it. Light, Mei, Aoyuki, Ellie, and one other person had to work together to contain the spear's power to prevent destruction. But now, that seal was broken, and the one who broke the seal was none other than Light himself. It was like someone unchaining a monster that had long been imprisoned. Light looked immensely pleased. A satisfied smile never left Light's face. It was clear Light was enjoying this battle from the deepest part of his heart. There was no fear, doubt, or worry. And now, Light held the Shinso in his hand, ready to show what true despair was. Seeing this, Sasha immediately panicked and ordered the angels to attack Light. Without waiting, one of the angels immediately threw a mace spear toward Light with full force. But strangely, Light just stood still without moving, doing nothing to avoid the attack. And the crazier part was that the mace spear instantly shattered upon touching Light, as if hitting an iron wall that emitted a wave of destructive energy. Light immediately walked slowly toward one of the angels. His gaze was sharp, his expression flat, but full of curiosity. Light wanted to know if angels could also feel fear, could also sink into despair, or if they were merely perfect beings without emotion. Suddenly, a light barrier attack was fired from the mage-type angel, like a last-ditch effort to maintain distance. But Light merely raised his hand, and the attack immediately bounced off like a plastic ball thrown against a wall. Light stated flatly, "I'm bored of playing games." There was no intention of holding back or showing mercy anymore. It was time for hell to begin. Sasha was truly shocked seeing what had just happened right before her eyes. All the carefully prepared attacks had absolutely no effect on Light. Meanwhile, Michael hurriedly told Sasha to keep blowing the magical shell, urging her to resummon the angels as much as possible. It was like a desperate attempt to fight Light, who was now wielding the Shinso. On the other side, Light's right hand began to burn, not because he was attacked, but because the power of the Shinso was too brutal, to the point where even Light's hand, which was filled with concentrated energy, couldn't withstand it. But Light didn't care at all. If one hand burned or two hands melted, none of it mattered. For Light, only one thing was important: revenge must succeed. Ellie began to feel anxious looking at Light's condition. But Light was instead surprised, because it turned out Sasha could genuinely resummon angels repeatedly without limit. This clearly made the situation more complicated. Sasha immediately ordered the new angels to attack Light. The angels immediately unleashed their ultimate skill, Holy Javelin. Sacred light gathered, the spear's form was magnificent, and it immediately launched toward Light. But Light just stood there. There was no sign of panic, no attempt to dodge, just watching the attack approach. Sasha started ranting while laughing like a winner. Sasha was absolutely certain Light would die now. She even took the opportunity to mock Light as a lowly human who was nothing compared to an angel. But Sasha's assumption was completely wrong. Light immediately activated the Shinso's power again. As its power emerged, the surrounding aura immediately changed drastically, and Sasha was instantly shocked, as if helpless watching it. The holy javelin that looked overpowered was immediately neutralized, without movement, without effort. Light was still standing in the same spot, perfectly calm. Sasha didn't give up. Still with the confidence that came from who knows where, Sasha ordered the highest angel to launch a full attack. But the result was still the same. All attacks were parried and neutralized by the Shinso. It even looked like Light did it without serious intent. Light briefly commented to Sasha, asking if her attack was finished, because now it was Light's turn to counterattack. Sasha immediately panicked, hurriedly telling the angels to attack again. But the result? Still the same. Not a single one managed to touch Light. It was completely futile, more like a waste of energy. Finally, Sasha started showing signs of despair. Every mental attack, every ultimate skill was deflected just like that. Light even added fuel to Sasha's stress, encouraging her to keep attacking. But it was clearly sarcasm, laughing casually while saying that if Sasha didn't attack again, she might be killed for real. Sasha had run out of ideas. Meanwhile, Light became even more relaxed, as if watching a boring circus performance. The situation was clearly reversed, and now all that remained was for Light to make his counterattack. Light continued to provoke Sasha. His insults became sharper, showing no mercy. It was no longer just a physical attack. Now Light was also attacking her mentality. Sasha and Michael immediately looked even more panicked, their facial expressions like people who had run out of options. But even so, Sasha still forced herself to fight. A command was issued again, telling the angels to attack Light one more time, but this time using a triple cast to be more brutal. The problem was, the result was still the same. Light neutralized all those attacks like swatting mosquitoes. Light even commented casually, saying the attack was tasteless, while urging them to try harder. Michael still didn't give up, hurriedly telling Sasha to revive the angels again, hoping for a miracle. But the angels didn't respond at all. It was like the signal was completely lost. The magical shell usually used for summoning immediately shattered, and that made Sasha panic even more, now looking terrified out of her mind. Light calmly said that the Shinso Gungnir was indeed a god-burying weapon. Even trash angels could be truly buried as trash with it. Michael started looking disoriented, as if he didn't understand why everything happened so quickly. Still trying to remain calm, Michael thought to himself that the Shinso Gungnir must be nonsense, because the so-called Genesis weapon was level 9,999, and according to his logic, it was impossible for anyone to wield a weapon of that level. Michael still considered Light to be just talking, not fully believing him. Michael was still confident he was safe because he had the Blessing and Punishment shield, a shield that was said to be able to reflect and withstand any attack, regardless of its form. But Light just smiled faintly, saying, "Enough talking, why don't we just test how strong that shield is?" Light then launched an attack, a casual smile still plastered on his face, while mocking Michael with sarcastic words, asking how far the pride of the noble elf race could be defended. Light's attack struck Michael directly. No circling around, no warning, just a massive explosion that made the entire place tremble. Michael and Sasha immediately looked battered, wounds everywhere, blood dripping from their entire bodies. Michael was stunned, totally shocked, because his trusted shield was utterly shattered, like a cheap item hit by a sledgehammer. Still in disbelief, Michael questioned himself. Is Light truly a master? Sasha was starting to not know what to do anymore. Confusion mixed with fear, while thinking why someone as dangerous as Light was still living freely without anyone controlling him. Michael started to realize this was completely out of control, and said this was a huge mistake that needed to be immediately reported to the Elf Queen. As a last effort, Michael immediately activated the magic card Wings in the Sky, intending to escape from the Great Tower. But the reality was even worse. The magic item couldn't activate at all. The teleportation magic seemed to be completely blocked. Sasha and Michael panicked even more, like two people surrounded with no way out. Light calmly explained that all teleportation access was indeed locked inside this tower, and all of it had been prepared by Ellie long ago. Ellie chimed in, explaining that she used metastasis magic to close off all magic channels in this tower. That magic was Ellie's original spell, the result of long years of research in the Abyss. It was no wonder the magic was so strong and complex. Michael, who had been panicking, now started to look desperate, but there was still a small glimmer of hope in his mind. Michael believed that the only hope left was the elf leader, who was around level 3000. But before his spirit could return, Light immediately summoned Ice Heat and the other troops. In an instant, all of Light's elite forces immediately gathered. Not only his troops, but Light also displayed all the severely injured sparring victims. There were Hardy, Sharfat, Nia, Kia, and also Mast. All of them were thrown right in front of Sasha and Michael, as if deliberately to show how hopeless their current position was. Light just smiled casually while asking in a relaxed and sarcastic tone, "What kind of hope were you just talking about?" Sasha and Michael immediately screamed, unable to believe what they were seeing, filled with a total despair that could no longer be hidden. Light's elite forces had just finished annihilating all the enemies, and now they were kneeling before Light. The atmosphere was immediately silent, broken only by heavy breathing and the dripping of blood from the surviving wounded bodies. All the elite forces gave their salute and a complete report on the recent battle. Light listened while leaning back comfortably, but his expression was utterly flat. After that, Light said there was only one final step: the extermination of Sasha and Michael, the two traitors who had caused this huge mess. But Michael, who was already battered and filled with fear, immediately spoke first. Michael said he would submit to Light, then started rambling with suggestions. Michael offered cooperation, proposing they join forces to conquer the Elf Kingdom. Michael assured Light that he was different from Hardy, claiming Michael was more adept at politics and could be an important asset. Light immediately became annoyed hearing the rambling. According to Light, all of Michael's words were trash. Light replied that he didn't care about empty talk or politics. Light's only goal was revenge and finding the truth that had been hidden all this time. Michael continued to babble, hoping for forgiveness, but Sasha, whose mental state was even more destroyed, grew increasingly hopeless. Sasha could only watch Michael humiliate himself with an empty stare, as if she couldn't believe this was her former party member. Light, seeing that sight, felt a sense of déjà vu. His mind was immediately taken back to the past, when Light was betrayed by his party in the abyss. That memory instantly made the atmosphere even colder. Michael continued rambling, but Light wasn't listening at all. Light finally said he wouldn't touch Michael. Michael momentarily felt relieved, thinking he would be spared. But it turned out, Light only handed Michael over to Ellie to be dealt with. Ellie was immediately delighted to receive the task. All this time, Ellie had been holding back her anger because Michael kept belittling Light in front of the elite forces. Now, Ellie got the green light directly from Light to retaliate for all those insults. Her badass mode immediately activated. Ellie said Michael shouldn't expect an easy death. Michael hurriedly made excuses, claiming he hadn't known Light's true power all along. But Ellie countered, "Understanding is not enough." According to Ellie, all of Michael's bluster was irrelevant. Now was the time to carve memories directly onto Michael's body, clearly implying torture. Michael tried to escape, relying on his speed. But Ellie immediately activated the skill Thorn Binding. Dark, thorny shadows emerged from the ground and immediately choked Michael's body, making Michael completely immobile. There was no hope for escape because Michael's power level was genuinely far below Ellie's. Ellie walked slowly, then placed her hand on Michael's head. Ellie said she would now look into Michael's mind, and the process would be excruciatingly painful. Ellie concluded with a cold sentence, telling Michael to experience torture like in hell. Meanwhile, Light walked slowly towards Sasha. Light's gaze was incredibly sharp, like a predator looking at its prey. Light said it was Sasha's turn now. Sasha immediately started rambling incoherently, discussing the past when they were still in the same party. Sasha claimed she had always been kind to Light, but Light didn't believe her. Light said all of Sasha's kindness back then was just a mask, a big lie. Light still vividly remembered how Sasha looked down on the human race and even tried to kill Light during the betrayal incident. Light also clearly remembered the arrow that was once lodged in his leg because of Sasha. Sasha tried to make excuses again, talking nonsense. Then Sasha said the most disgusting thing. She claimed she loved Light very much, and Light could do anything to Sasha's body if he wanted. Aoyuki, hearing that, immediately grew furious. The floor beneath her immediately cracked because Aoyuki's killing aura surged drastically. Her face looked like a demon ready to massacre Sasha repeatedly. But Light instead scolded Aoyuki. Light asked since when Aoyuki had permission to touch Sasha. Aoyuki was immediately stunned and hurriedly apologized, her expression a mix of shock and shame, quite funny amidst the terrifying atmosphere. Light said he wouldn't kill Sasha, but Sasha would be taken to the abyss. Light also said that Garu had been captured and was currently being tortured. Then, Light also mentioned he might consider destroying the entire elf race as well. According to Light, in the darkness of the abyss, Sasha wouldn't be able to die, even though she would feel unimaginable pain, basically endless torture. Light ordered Mera to take Sasha to the underground chambers of the abyss. Light said there was no need to hold back in making Sasha feel the deepest despair. Mera immediately released his entire army of insects. Thousands of insects immediately swarmed Sasha, biting her body from all directions. Amidst the chaos, Light suddenly remembered something. Light picked up an arrow, then threw it directly at Sasha. The arrow pierced Sasha's thigh, as if to repay what Sasha had done to Light. Sasha immediately screamed in pain, her body trembling, blood dripping from her wound. Sasha kept begging for forgiveness, but no one cared. Mera's insect army continued to swarm, and finally, Sasha was swallowed alive. Sasha's body was dragged by the thousands of insects into the abyss, to a place where there was no light and only endless torment. After releasing the first seal of the Shinso Gungnir, Light began to think that the step was too brutal, just for a mere combat test, while his initial goal was only to take revenge on Sasha. But since it was over and there was nothing else to pursue, the revenge mission was officially concluded. Light, along with his elite forces, returned to the Abyss, their main headquarters, that was dark and filled with a menacing energy. A few days later, the atmosphere in the Abyss began to calm down. In his spacious office, filled with piles of documents, Light was sitting while reading the battle report written by Ellie. Light's face looked very satisfied. The report was very complete, full of tactical details and the enemy's condition. Ellie had apparently gathered all the information from the memories of the White Knights who were previously defeated. From that, the main reason why the world's nations were so cautious about the figure known as the Master was revealed. According to Ellie, the Master's existence had the potential to destroy the world. If left unchecked, all nations and established systems could be completely ruined because civilization would be accelerated unnaturally. Light immediately considered that rather than watching the world crumble, it was better to destroy the master candidates before everything got worse. Light also began to think about his own past. It turned out he was once also researched as a master candidate, but because he didn't meet the requirements, his party instead decided to kill Light. All those betrayal incidents started to look clearer in Light's head, especially after knowing how big the Master's effect on the world was. Ellie, seeing Light becoming increasingly lost in his thoughts, immediately suggested moving on to the next mission rather than going around in the Master conspiracy. Ellie said it was time to destroy the Elf Kingdom entirely. All the past wounds and betrayals Light had experienced also had many traces in the Elf Kingdom. So it was better to annihilate them all at once, leaving nothing behind. Meanwhile, in another place, far from the Abyss, the Elf Kingdom was in chaos. The Queen looked utterly panicked after receiving news about the White Knights disappearing without a trace. There were rumors they had all been eliminated. The Prime Minister even shouted loudly, denying the news because he thought it was impossible for all of them to be defeated. The Elf Queen was equally hysterical, certain that Hardy, their strongest knight, couldn't be defeated so easily. But the atmosphere in the royal room grew more tense and panicked. Everyone there began to feel confused and terrified. Suddenly, a guard rushed in and gave news that made the entire room fall silent. Hundreds of dragons were flying toward the Elf Kingdom, and the one leading the attack was none other than Ellie herself. Before anyone could react, a massive explosion occurred. Fireballs from the dragons had already struck the outskirts of the kingdom. The explosion was huge, hot, and damaged the royal area in seconds. Smoke and fire began to spread everywhere. Ellie stood atop one of the dragons, her eyes staring straight at the palace. Ellie said she wanted to land in the palace garden briefly, just to look for one person who could be held responsible for all the chaos and past sins. But if no one dared to step forward within 3 minutes, Ellie would not hesitate to melt the entire elf city until nothing remained. The situation in the Elf Kingdom grew increasingly chaotic. When news of the dragon attack spread, the guards immediately moved quickly to evacuate Queen Leaf Vi. In total panic, everyone in the palace began to lose their composure. Meanwhile, Ellie had descended into the city park, standing casually surrounded by hundreds of dragons ready to breathe fire at any moment. Ellie didn't do anything yet, just waited. Who would appear to take responsibility? Not long after, Queen Leaf Vi finally appeared. In a loud tone, Queen Leaf Vi scolded Ellie's arrival, deeming it disrespectful to show up with a horde of dragons as if initiating war. But Ellie immediately responded casually and cynically. To Ellie, Queen Leaf Vi's statement was just empty words. Queen Leaf Vi didn't realize her position. She didn't understand who she was facing now. Without further ado, Ellie introduced herself as the mage from the Great Tower. Queen Leaf Vi immediately asked about the whereabouts of Hardy and all the White Knights. Ellie simply replied, "They have all been given their just punishment." That answer made Queen Leaf Vi even more enraged. But Ellie was tired of hearing the unclear ranting, so she immediately said she wanted to look into Queen Leaf Vi's mind herself, to know what she was really thinking. Suddenly, the entire elf army surged forward to protect Queen Leaf Vi. But before they could even touch Ellie, all those troops were instantly killed by Ellie's sacrificial tree magic. Hundreds of sharp thorns pierced their bodies simultaneously. Ellie stated this was strategic class magic, not some trivial spell. Queen Levi, seeing the incident, immediately fled, but it was useless. Her body was instantly ensnared by the thorn-binding spell launched by Ellie. In an instant, Queen Levi couldn't move. Ellie advanced slowly, then raised her hand toward Queen Levi's head to read her mind. But because Queen Levi kept rambling incoherently, Ellie activated the silence spell so she could concentrate. After successfully reading her mind, Ellie's expression changed. Her face looked uncomfortable. It turned out that Queen Levi's mind was only filled with arrogance and hatred toward humans. Ellie then declared that she herself was a human who was studied underground when she was a child. And as a human, Ellie was deeply angry at the cruel treatment of the human race by the elves. Ellie then stated firmly that no human should ever be enslaved in the Elf Kingdom again. If they dared to do so again, the entire kingdom would be annihilated. No discussion. At the end of the meeting, Ellie officially declared absolute independence for the human race. A few days after the conquest incident, Light sat comfortably reading Ellie's report. All the results of the conquest, intel info, and strategies were detailed neatly. Ellie informed him that the information extracted from Queen Levi's mind was almost identical to Hardy's information regarding the Master. But there was an interesting addition: the emergence of the term other existence besides the Master. Light immediately thought hard. Perhaps all this time, the enemies from various factions were not pursuing Light because he was considered a master candidate, but because he was mistaken for that other existence. Ellie was also confused because Queen Levi seemed unaware of the other existence. So, the two of them grew more suspicious that a larger mystery was behind all of this. While discussing the mission to liberate humans, Light looked happy because everything went smoothly. Ellie reported that around 5,000 humans had been freed from slave status. All of this was successful thanks to the help of the Mohawk team, who, despite their funny antics, made a huge contribution. Light chuckled, but internally, Light actually wanted to conquer the Elf Kingdom too. But after considering it, it seemed it wasn't worth it. So, it was better to proceed with Ellie's genius plan. Light smiled faintly and thanked Ellie. For a moment, Ellie felt truly happy to receive that recognition and immediately returned it with the highest respect for Master Light. But the atmosphere suddenly changed when Mei entered and gave important news. One of the main targets in Light's revenge mission, the dark elf named Sionne, was currently dying and trapped inside a dungeon. Light was immediately shocked when he heard Sionne's name mentioned. This news clearly escalated the situation.